We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Mantry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Didn't put it in the rundown, but did you see all the Star Wars news? There was all the gazillion new things that they announced coming out.
whatever.
So,
I don't care about
Star Wars Celebration.
Not that I'm not excited about seeing it. It's because, and I guess I'll talk about this when we talk about what we watch, but
Yes.
I've been diligently watching The Mandalorian as it comes out.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
It's not that I'm not excited about seeing stuff. And, I think one of them is like pre everything. It's like
One of them is 25,000 years ago, the dawn of the Jedi.
I assume it's going to be another political intrigue thriller, much like the
don't
prequels
know.
were. It's just going to be a Senate. It's just going to be a Senate. There's just going to be a bunch of people floating around in chairs talking to each other about stuff.
People who know the comics and the books far better than I do have been like, oh yeah, there's things that have been mentioned in the past. Planet where the Sith originated, so that's probably going to be in there, and then stuff about the Jedi Temple, and they even had little Easter eggs during the announcement where there were symbols that they know were in the original Jedi Temple and stuff. So okay, they're bringing it all in.
They're going to have to work real hard. I'm going to be honest with you. They're going to have to work real hard on that whole Sith thing. I am fine with the bad guys being just super bad guys, but nothing about the Sith suggests to me that they could have come from a civilization. like if they're a religion or some sort of group that gets together, from different cultures, that makes a little bit more sense. But to have a planet that evolved to
I don't know if
spit out
it was
the rule of two or whatever it is.
There was a whole thing about was it Darth Bane who came up with the rule of two? That was never from the original, and it was just
I don't know.
There was mentions of the planet where the Sith started. That doesn't necessarily mean they were a race that inhabited that planet at the beginning.
Yeah,
it was just and then there was there's the wellspring of life where the midichlorians come from and stuff. I don't know any of this stuff. I was just reading all about it on people who were reacting to the announcement.
Can't we just forget the midichlorian thing? Can we just
the fan edits of the prequels eliminate.
Didn't we all collectively groan at that? And I am
sure
a Star
did.
Wars fan,
Yes.
but I went, what? No.
Yeah.
No.
The mystical force that permeates everything was far, far more fun to think about because it gave you that.
Yeah, because it could be anybody.
It could be anybody.
But now you got to be related to somebody.
The imagination that I could tap into the force potentially, but it turns out I have to have parasites in me, and that's the only way I can do it. So, yeah.
I have to be a clone of Palpatine. That's how I get it. Because that made the series better. Everybody complains about the prequels, and they're like, oh yeah, but the last one of the sequels was the best. No, are you kidding me? Anyways, I'm not bitter.
Yeah.
So
I'm excited for Ahsoka because we know that's coming. That is the first thing coming this summer. It looks really good, I thought it looks like a lot of fun. And I'm going to be happy to see a live action Thrawn. I'm excited for that. So there we go.
I am
fun stuff.
Super excited to see what they do with Thrawn. The Timothy Zahn books, I've read them multiple times, and I do love them. I do like those books. But if you read it with any sort of critical eye, you're like, oh my God, is the Force just a get out of jail free card for the writer?
So I mean,
it's
those
so
books
bad.
are now Star Wars legacy. Those are not canon, but they borrowed the character of Thrawn. He was in some of the recent animated stuff. So anyway,
did see that too,
this has been a very geeky beginning to this thing. If for anyone
it's
who's
not
listening
going to get any better. I'm going to be honest with you. Let's talk about what you watched, Rob, so I can talk about what I want to talk about.
Let's shall. So I ventured out to the theater a little too hastily, it turns out, to see Shazam, Fury of the Gods. And I must say it like Shazam because there's an exclamation point on the end of that. Not a colon, an exclamation point. That is correct. Punctuation in there. But yeah, turns out if I had just waited till this week, I could have watched it at home because, oh boy, did that leave theaters quickly. I was in there for 4 weeks, and that was the end of that.
Okay. I know nothing about this movie. I haven't seen any reviews or anything. I just want to say that when you announce before the movie is released that basically nothing that happens in this movie may be important to anything else, it's not that people actually care. but it just gives people a reason to go, oh, I didn't really want to go to the movies anyways.
Well, like the big wide audience will have no idea and they won't care. But
I think that movie had been released, without COVID being around, had been released, in a relatively normal time after the first Shazam, which I really liked. I think this movie would have been a huge hit. Huge.
Maybe. So,
that being said, I haven't seen any reviews or anything about the movie, so maybe it's crap, and in which case it would have done the exact same thing it did. So what did it do, Rob?
Okay, so I mean, my take on it, I didn't hate it, but I didn't think it was particularly good. This movie really, really, I don't know if this is the case, but it really, really felt like to me watching it that this had about 18 rewrites, and every one of them kept like one little piece of something that was added, and then it didn't come together. Now, here's the thing. The whole premise, the whole like overarching, like this is the setup, I thought was quite compelling. The idea is Billy Batson, Captain Marvel or Shazam, whatever name he's going to go by, but Billy Batson is about to age out of the foster system. And Mary, who was the oldest of the foster siblings, has already aged out of the foster system, but she's kind of sticking around just because they're now this super family team. And then, like everybody's kind of growing up, things are changing, and he's feeling very anxious because he wants to keep the super family together. And he's like established this rule as their leader, like if we go out on a superhero call, we all go or none of us go. Like we've got to stick together. We can't have people like individually going off and doing their own thing. Now, the villains are the daughters of Atlas. There's 3 of them. So they are working together because they all agree that they want to reclaim their home. They've been imprisoned outside of their home for centuries, and they want to reclaim their home. They all agree on that, but one of them wants to do it at the expense of all the humans. One of them wants to do it while saving all the humans, and the third one, who's basically their leader, is just pragmatic and just wants to get the job done however it gets done. So you have a family versus a family. And I'm like, okay, that setup to me seems good and compelling, and it's like you could have great character arcs all in that. You could have the villains learn something from the heroes learn something from the villains, and like it looks like it should write itself. Well, like none of that plays out. Nobody learns anything. It's because it felt like there were 18 rewrites in this thing. Characters that like had moments that stood out just went nowhere after that scene. They were like, this is a good scene for this character, but then it has no payoff afterwards. Like
this doesn't sound anything like a WB movie. What are you talking about? This doesn't really sound like at all like the studio that put out Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice and let that Martha line go through.
There you go.
That doesn't sound anything like that. What are you talking about?
So, yeah, all of that turned out to not be a very great movie in the writing. And then there's Zachary Levi, who, okay, have you ever watched like old Robin Williams interviews where most of the time Robin Williams is hilarious and there's no denying that man's talent, but once in a while he'll do one of those interviews where he is so manic that it gets uncomfortable, and like some people are laughing because they're like awkwardly laughing, and some people still genuinely find him hilarious in that given interview, but sometimes he crosses over to that this is like uncomfortable to watch territory.
This might be a sickness sort of thing. You're like, I might be seeing somebody have a breakdown.
So for me, Zachary Levi's performance got very close to and crossed that line a little bit, where it went from being irreverent and humorous and he's silly and a little bit dumb to this feels desperate and cloying, and it just made me uncomfortable to watch.
You can't really blame the actor for as much as I have problems with him as a human being. I mean, usually what they do is they say, and they, especially if they're doing like off the cuff stuff or ad lib or whatever, it's just like just go with it, just say anything that comes to your mind, and we'll take the good stuff and put it in there.
But I'm just saying what ended up on screen.
That's a director/editor problem.
What ended up on screen for me just crossed that line into starting to feel uncomfortable and cringeworthy rather than affable, which is what he was going for, obviously.
Yes.
And then there's the big problem, which is that Billy Batson and Shazam are nothing alike. Nothing. There is no sense whatsoever that Billy Batson is still the same boy inside of this adult body. There is nothing that they are two completely separate characters. Whereas the rest of the super family, at least you can kind of be like, oh yeah, I see how that's the like kid version of them inside of an adult body.
That was always sort of the shtick though with him though, is that he would look like an adult, but he would say stuff and everybody would be like, what are you talking about?
No, but Billy Batson doesn't act as childish as Shazam does. Which was a little bit of a problem in the first movie, but it's a real extreme in this one, where like Billy Batson is kind of like depressed, and then Shazam is like Zachary Levi being completely manic. So anyway, I can't really say I like this movie. Now, I wanted to quickly mention on the technical side of things, I saw this in a large format screen, but again, I don't have any HDR or Dolby cinemas around in my area. The way that this movie was like graded, the image, you have to see it in HDR. It was like the whole Game of Thrones and whatever the new thing that's on HBO is going on. Like, some of the scenes, I'm like, is there even one nit on the entire screen at this point? It was so dim that you couldn't barely see anything that was going on the screen. And like during the climax, it was that dark. It was really like, if I'm watching this at home on an OLED, I'm sure it'll be okay. And this will be all the people who love their Lumigens and their Mad VRs will be singing their praises when they watch it on their projector at home. But if you go out to a regular theater to see this, I'm like, holy smokes, is that dark? Like there is nothing. It's just murky nothingness up there. On the audio side, I was kind of shocked because I was like, is this theater once again just has the volume down lower than it should be? I was thinking at first. Nope. Because some of the music and some of the explosions came in and they were full reference volume as far as I could tell. But a whole bunch of this movie was like, is this 70 decibels even? Like there was a gigantic dynamic range going on, but a whole bunch of it was mixed really quiet. So it's almost as though I think this was graded in a really good dubbing studio, like a really high grade, awesome audio system, fantastic HDR dubbing studio, and they didn't put any thought into, you know what, most of the theaters in the world don't look and sound as good as this dubbing stage, and maybe we should maybe
the home release will be better.
Yeah, so just a bit of a feeling on there for that. Okay, enough of me. What did you watch?
No movies. Actually, nothing. Really, okay. I'm gonna be honest with you.
You said you wanted to talk about something.
I do. I want to talk about a lot of stuff because I've been wanting to talk about it for a while, but we keep talking about other stuff. So I have been watching The Mandalorian as it's been coming out, which I mentioned, and I will say that if you've never seen The Mandalorian, any of the other seasons, and you're like, well, I don't really want to go back and watch because the first season everybody says is real slow, and the second season isn't.
I love
that
the first
much
season.
better. Anyways. If you don't, you can pick this season up, and it's just fine. Like they give you enough background to get you going.
Sure,
and that's pretty much it. All you got to know is Grogu's a little Yoda guy, and a little baby Yoda, and they're hanging out together. That's pretty much all you have to know for this whole thing. And they give you some flashbacks to get you catch up to speed, so it's fine. I think this season is phenomenal. I think it's hands down the best season so far. And this most recent. Now remember, I'm doing this on Tuesday, and it comes out on Wednesday.
That's
so by
right.
the time you hear this, there will have been a new episode, but the episode that I just watched was the one with Jack Black and Lizzo.
Yeah.
And
Christopher Lloyd, who
Christopher Lloyd, who I've seen in person, actually, acting in a small theater in Los Angeles, which means nothing to anybody but me. He was in the Harold Pinter play, Deception, or I think is what it's called, which is a great play, and he did a good job. But... and this is gonna tie into something else I'm about to say. When you see somebody who is on screen, who is so geeked out about being in the show, right? You're like, you're doing, and I'm gonna be really blunt here. You're doing a terrible job. You are doing a terrible job. Like Jack Black, who I love, and Lizzo, who I have no feelings about one way or the other, did not do a good job. But if they could just have gone the whole time, that's a fair amount of what they wanted to do
going on from those two. Yes, absolutely.
All they wanted to do is go, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I'm here. This is so awesome. I'm in Star Wars. That's all they wanted to say the entire. You could see it on their faces. Weird smiles the entire time. Lizzo tried so hard to like do a acting. She just, I don't know if she's capable. I don't know what her training is or anything like that, but just so but it was the energy that they gave off in that scene was just like, I'm going to give you a pass at this one. I'm going to give you a pass because you're clearly very excited to be here and you're trying so hard. And if Jack Black can't hold it together, then how do we expect Lizzo to hold it together? But yes, I did not think they did a very good job. They took away from the entire thing. I think it's by far the worst thing that's happened in the show up to this point, at least this season. But I'm giving them a pass because of how excited they were to be there. But I think that this season has been just amazing. So I'm hoping, and you know, a lot of the stories have not been specifically about whatever his real name is,
Din
the
Djarin,
Mandalorian character, Din Djarin, right? But it's been about what's her name's character from Battlestar Galactica.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, which I've liked. I think there's no reason why we can't explore other characters.
I don't mind her basically being the co-star this season.
Yes. And I think she's doing a great job.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't know who would think that she couldn't do a great job. She's been great in everything we've ever seen her in. So I've really liked this season. I also started watching Willow. I've only watched a couple of episodes, so I'm not going to give a full review.
The series version, of course.
The series version. I hated the movie. Oh. I hated it so much. I saw it in the theaters when I was a kid. I have nothing but disdain for that movie. I cannot tell you what happened in it. Okay. All I know is I walked out of that theater going, oh, what a waste of my time. It just seemed like it dragged and it was boring and I didn't really like it. The first episode of Willow I thought was great, and it was shocking in that I expected something to be more Disney-esque, but the villains are like straight out of Hellraiser.
Oh, okay.
Like, jeez.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that.
They popped in and you're like, oh my God, that guy doesn't have any eyes. And this one over here's got a cage on his head. And I was like, okay, this is going to be really good. And then the next couple of episodes are not so great. So we'll see. And I cannot, what's his name? The Willow character. What's the
Warwick Davis?
Name? Yeah, Warwick Davis. I'm sorry. I think he's terrible. I just think he's terrible. I'm not a single solitary line that he utters has any believability to me. I don't think he's a bad person. I don't know anything about the guy. I just think he's awful. And as in this particular, and maybe it's the directing, maybe it's the shoot, maybe it's a bunch of other stuff. I don't know, but I am not enjoying his performance on there at all. And some of the writing is a little, let's just say, predictable.
Okay.
But, yeah, I will give a full report when I get to the end of it, because now that I've started it, I am going to finish it. And lastly, last night, we watched the first episode of The Night Agent, which is on Netflix.
I've been hearing good things about this. Yeah.
It's gotten a lot of good reviews, and it's already picked up for season 2 because Netflix is completely chaotic over there. The first episode was exciting. Okay. Everybody was very tense in the room, and we'll see how that goes. But
who's in this? I know next to nothing about this. I've just heard that it's good.
People.
Okay.
One guy who's about as milk toast as you can possibly get, who looks exactly like the FBI agent you think that they're supposed to look like when they actually
Central
look more
casting.
Like me. Yeah. I mean, square jaw and muscular and everything else. Tortured. And then some woman who's a hacker. Okay. I don't know. I don't really know. I'm not going to give too much away.
So I guess you're not going there for the star power.
I've seen him before. Okay. I think I've seen her before too, but it's just, it's more about the story. It's it's like, oh, remember 24? Remember when that was cool, right? We should do that again. Which is not the setup they're doing, but it has that kind of energy to it.
Gotcha.
So we'll see. All right, let's get into this podcast here. I do want to talk about, maybe I'll slip it in later, but the Marvel's teaser trailer has dropped,
yes.
I thought it looked fantastic. And speaking of people who are super excited to be in things,
yes,
the actor who plays Miss Marvel is like, she didn't even have to try. She's just like, her character is excited to be around these other characters, and she is excited to be around these actors. It just works.
Nope.
I think she's phenomenal. So
use that energy.
She's just like, they just go over that. Be you. Just be you. Can you be you? Right. She's like, I don't know if I can be me. And then Alison Brie walks in. She goes, ee! She's like, perfect. Roll it.
Alison Brie. That's not who plays Captain Marvel.
What's her name?
Now it's out of my head. Brie Larson. There you go.
Brie Larson. I knew there was a Brie in there someplace. Alison Brie's the other actress that's on Community, right?
She's on Community, yeah. She was Annie in Community, yeah.
That's right. That's how I got mixed up. AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to our website and find all of our podcast notes, as well as Flickr albums, so you can follow along with whatever pictures we may or may not be talking about at any given time, as well as our older episodes. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant, where the pictures will be embedded within the video. So you can look away and listen like a normal podcast, and when you want to see when we talk about a picture, you can look over and see if there's a picture there.
That's how it works.
Dual screens for all you people that work at home types.
Yes.
Which
Speaking of looking at us, your Skype call has gone really choppy and pixelated, and I don't think it's on my end because I'm all hardwired in and everything. But
I'm hardwired as well. I can see the little light on right there.
Go internet.
Maybe it's not on. No, it says it's connected. I will say I have been having some internet issues lately, and they're installing fiber optic in the neighborhood. And the other night we were trying to watch a YouTube video, and it got really pixelated. My wife's like, "What the heck's going on?" I'm like, "Well, if we had fiber optic, this wouldn't happen."
Supposedly. All right, we'll chalk it up to that for now.
Well, John, I think it's sabotage by the fiber optic people trying to get us to switch services. All right. Contact Rob directly, rob at avrant.com. His Twitter is at FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. All right, I want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank our 137 patrons over at patreon.com. It's a service where you can sign up to become a contributing listener to our podcast. Every month we'll take a little bit of money from you, a minimum of $1, and give most of it to us. So $12 a year for the how many 520 million hours, 52 hours, I don't know, a lot of hours of us talking. So there you go.
That is correct. That's patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to give an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 137 patrons over there for your financial support.
Got some notes of gratitude from keeping the podcast going through. Gee, a lot of stuff happened last week. With you, there was a whole bunch of stuff.
There was a lot of news,
home theater
news so much, but news, life news.
And I know we're terribly insulated over here on on this side. I listen to the BBC every once in a while. I'll catch a few minutes of it as I'm driving my son around in the morning to go to school or whatever, and I'll be like, "What are they talking about?" like, and this year and today in Zimbabwe, I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm definitely not going to hear that on CNN."
Nope.
Or whatever news organization that's over here. Not that I have cable. So the podcast going from notes of gratitude from Micah, who says he discovered our. He discovered our podcast just a few months ago and has been enjoying it ever since. He's slowly working his way through our archive of episodes. There's only a couple. It'll only take you a little while. Says there's a lot to listen to.
Decade and a half of
little
archive back there. That's right.
Got notes of gratitude from David Martin. Martin appreciates that we tackled some of the marketing BS claims that he's asked about recently. It'd be nice if there were more pushback against that sort of thing in the industry, but you can understand how difficult it would be to regulate that sort of thing. Well, I push back against it all the time on AV Gadgets as well as AVRant, so I don't know what else to tell you, man. Ilango and Adam. So that was Micah, David, Martin, Ilango, and Adam. Thank you for thanking us.
That's right. I'll say your names one more time. Micah, David, Martin, Ilango, and Adam. Thank you all very much for sending us those notes of gratitude. Your notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
In the news this week, for the Canadians looking to buy absorption panel, apparently they've been around since 2012. Which is when the world was supposed to end in 2012?
It was. That was one of the Mayan things.
That was the Mayan one, right?
I don't think the Mayans actually predicted that, but people's interpretations of something that was in
way?
Mayan culture said that it was 2012.
Had they known 2020 was coming, they might have pushed for it a little harder.
It's the end of a great cycle of creation or whatever. Who knows? Yeah. Maybe it did end, and we're in the vestiges now.
We didn't realize it.
We didn't
There's
notice.
A bug in here. I don't know. They've been around since 2012 and expanded in 2019, but Rob only just found out about Inity Acoustics.
I've seen their videos and they say Inity, so I think that's how they.
That's dumb.
I don't know.
Inity.
That's the way I heard them say it. So I'm going to go with that.
Well, whatever. That's probably some French Canadian pronunciation. Inity Acoustics. They have a small product section, but it's the basic absorption panels and triangular corner bass traps we're most often looking for. Inity's Equinoxer panels.
That should be panels, yes. Sorry.
Panels are 2x4 and 3 inches thick using a wooden frame and rock wool insulation. Standard fabrics are black, white, brown, and red. You can request custom fabric colors that will cost extra. The white panels cost $87 per panel, but the other standard fabrics are just $75 per panel, and that's Canadian dollars, which are like somehow both smaller and bigger than American dollars. I can understand why the white panels cost more, because you got to wear gloves with them. If not, it gets fingerprints.
It's whatever fabric they're using and whatever extra labor. That's where the extra cost comes from. But yeah, $75 a panel, pretty darn reasonable. 3-inch thick panels, which is nice.
They also have 2-inch thick versions called Cloud, but the price per panel is identical. So, yeah whatever. I actually don't think that's a problem. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's hilarious, but whatever.
Yeah.
So, then they have the Bermuda bass traps. I think they really need to figure out this naming convention.
They are a little all over the place.
Stick with something, because Equinox or Cloud and Bermuda. I mean, listen, if I was taking the SAT, I would.
Well, Bermuda because it's a triangle, Cloud because those are the ones they intend to go on your ceiling because they're thinner and lighter. Equinoxer, I'm not exactly sure where that came from. So
I don't know. Equinoxer is to Cloud as Bermuda is to, and I'd be like,
yes,
I got no clue.
There you go.
Bermuda bass traps, 47 inches tall and look just like Gick tri-traps. They sell them in pairs for packaging reasons. $300 per pair, $350 for white. They have a couple of room packages with discounted package prices as well. But before everything gets too excited, if you live in the greater Toronto area and can pick up your order from their Bellevue location, or live in southern Ontario and can use their local courier, then these are terrific prices. But for the rest of Canada, they only offer shipping via FedEx, and essentially doubles the price of whatever panels you order. It still ends up less expensive in total versus importing from the US, but it sure stings to see these massive shipping charges added to your bill. And with the price of gas, who knows? I don't know what gas is there, but OPEC, I think they cut 1 million gallons a day, or I have no idea what any of that means.
Yeah, we're pretty close to $2 a liter now where I live, so
that's expensive.
It is.
That is very expensive. I think when we were in Australia, it was like $1.30 something, and I thought that was ridiculous. MQA, Master Quality Authenticated, which is something that we have often touted here as being bupkis, has filed for an appointment of administrators in the UK. Which is essentially the equivalent of filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the US. According to reporting over at Acoustics, MQA has been attempting to get their MQ Air codec added to the Bluetooth standard, but it was rejected. Sucks to be you. Under UK law, if you want to sell off just a part of your company and not the whole thing, you have to bring in administrators, hence the filing. MQ Air has been renamed as SCL6, potentially to separate it from the MQA branding, and they appear to be attempting to sell off the SCL6 codec to recoup some cash. I'll be honest with you. I mean, it's very hard for me to care about this, like, full stop, but it begs the question if somebody over at the Bluetooth Alliance went, but you guys, I mean, you're not really doing anything.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's been one of the really big problems with MQA is that now they've always said because their technology is patented, they're not going to describe how any of it works. Right. But actual engineers in that who have been like, what does it do? Because like I've put up things on services that use MQA and the light lights up and the blue light comes on and it says master quality authenticated, and I never had anything to do with that, and I created the master. So what does it do? Because I never authenticated this thing. And they're like, nope, we can't tell you. It's all patented and proprietary. So I think once the Bluetooth organization got it, they're like, but what does it do? Why would we add this codec to our specification when you won't tell us what it does?
Yeah. It's clearly the deep state trying to hold back the audio files.
Right. I mean,
I might write that article. The deep state suppresses MQA.
Oh, you're going to get lots of traction and hit on that.
I'll get some traction on that one.
Yeah. I would say, of course, normally don't ever read the comments on anything, but over this Acoustics article, the comments that were there, they are quite funny because most of the people were like kind of dancing on MQA's grave, and they're kind of like, yeah, good riddance. We don't really need this anymore. And then there's like the one guy who's a gigantic MQA title fan who's like, my whole library is going to be worthless if they go away. And I just found it kind of.
Can we just all admit that your library was already useless? Already worthless? I mean, come on. That's not...
dear. Anyway, it's not necessarily the end of MQA because they're just trying to recoup some cash and apparently sell off a portion of their business, and we're kind of forced to do this legal filing. But yeah, it just doesn't seem like it's, in growth mode anymore. Say that much.
But what about the audio files, Rob?
Yeah.
What will they put? What container will they use for their stuff? I cannot tell you how many people have either emailed me or commented on articles that are like,
Mm-hmm.
the only way to get good audio is through wave files. You can't use FLAC. I'm like, but yeah, you can't. There's like 4 or 5 different lossless audio.
There are plenty of
codecs out there. Wave is not the
which
only
you can
one. No, it's
objectively and demonstrably prove are exactly the same thing comes out as goes in. Otherwise, it wouldn't be lossless.
Yeah, otherwise it's just it's not really that hard to show. Like, I mean, so for those of you that wonder how these things are authenticated, it's very, very easy. Okay, you take the wave file, you put it into the whatever container, the lossless container. Then you take it out of the lossless container,
decode
and then you decode it. Then you invert it. You take the inverse of the original wave file, and you add those together.
Yeah.
And you should get a silence.
Absolute nothingness. They should 100% cancel.
If you get a straight line from beginning to end with no sounds whatsoever, what went in and came out were the same.
Yes.
And that's all.
And we can show how, like, with MP3, that doesn't happen. With MP3.
We even have a podcast that has a bunch of links to that.
Right.
We should find that somehow. I don't
know. MP3, which is lossy. There is something in the original signal that does not come back out at the end of the encoding and then decoding process. And you do that. You take the original file, you invert it, you play it back on top of the one that was encoded and then decoded as MP3, and there's some sound still there. There's still some sound there.
You can hear what is missing.
That's
what was taken out. And it's dropped. Like usually like a little bit of background stuff that you can't. It's like a little depth. You might call it depth, but it's just stuff that the codec believes that you can't hear anyway, so it just drops.
But then when you really shrink the bitrate down to like lower than 96 kilobit MP3, and you do that process, it's like the whole song is still there. You can like recognize the whole song is still there after subtracting the MP3 from the wave. If
you encode it and then re-encode it, and then you know what I mean, if you keep doing it, it'll do the same sort of thing. So what Rob is saying is if you take a really small bit rate, low bit rate version, or if you take a moderate bit rate, which really doesn't get rid of that much, that that's noticeable, but you do it multiple times. You'll start losing. Loss. Yeah, you'll lose a lot.
I've seen people refer to generational loss in lossless codecs, and they're like, but if you do it multiple times, you're sure to lose something. It's like, nope, you don't understand how digital things work. That's the whole point. Is you can infinitely
You're losing
copy
the plot. Does that count? You lost the plot.
You can infinitely encode and decode if it's lossless, and you do not have any generational loss. That's the point.
Yeah. Comments here, Joe. When Lee was here a couple of weeks ago, Joe shared some photos and details of the most recent theater he installed at an assisted living residence, and we really love the way it turned out, and I too love it. It's got speakers in lots of places, and it's got
classy.
It's like the GIC
Impression Series panels. That's what they are. Yep.
The dual ones, which for looks,
like it very much.
Yeah. He showed a couple of photos from a similar project that he completed earlier, in which he didn't manage to convince the clients to go with the same color scheme and they went with blue and god-awful carpet, which I guess is very movie theater appropriate.
It's very movie theater carpet. It's got reels, film reels on there and everything, and stars.
That screen's not big enough. Let's just start with that.
It doesn't look big enough. Yeah.
It doesn't appear to be very big, but he showed a couple of photos from a similar project. He wished he could go back and make some changes, but the clients were very happy. They didn't have the same color scheme, and they did not have acoustic panels on their walls, which is fine. But the clients were happy, and the budget for that one is closed. Now, the plan has begun on yet another assisted living residence theater. It's sort of becoming a specialty. At the time, he's getting to plan it from an earlier stage, so he'll make some structural and layout changes, and he's going to give quad subwoofers a try. It's been interesting how he's been able to basically use the same components list with just slight tweaks for each room. An Epson projector, silver ticket screen, Denon receiver, HSU, in-wall speakers, and SVS SB1000 Pro subs. The price points and price to performance ratio really seem to go over well with clients, and the results have been excellent so far, so we'll report back when this newest project is complete. Those subs are too small.
But that's those are the ones that the clients are A-okay with, and I get it.
Yeah,
and,
they're just looking at the price. They're not looking at the performance.
Absolutely.
And
And the size. A lot of them just don't want a gigantic, bulky thing, because it's like either in-wall subs or these are like the only things they're going to okay. And let's be honest here. If you put 2 or 4 SP1000 Pros, are they going to give you 115 decibel, 20 hertz bass? No, but they are going to be so much better than most of the other things that you would get at that size and price point. So I'm very okay with most people using those.
Yeah, so I actually am working, and in fact, I was working on an article this morning when my website broke for no apparent reason.
Fun.
It was very exciting for me, which is essentially talking about if you spend X amount on speakers, should you then spend also X amount on a subwoofer?
Yeah.
And as we know on this podcast, and everybody who listens to this podcast should know, that's not how it works. You spend the amount, you get the subwoofer that's right for the room, which may or may not have anything to do. Like if you bought really expensive speakers, you might get away with like a really quote unquote cheap subwoofer because of the room that you're in, and vice versa. You may be sitting in a small corner of a very large room and you got your speakers really close, so you get away with really cheap speakers, but then you have to, if you want to pressurize the space, you got to put this massive, very expensive subwoofer in there. And I completely understand that people, like normal people, don't get that, because subwoofers are magic to them. Like, I mean, it's the equivalent of casting a spell, and everybody's like, well, how does it work? It just does. You know, let me explain to you quarks. Nope, not doing it.
But you know what? Those SP1000 Pros, they are kind of magical. And you see how cute and little they are.
They are.
And then,
you know what?
You know, it's pretty impressive bass, honestly, that comes out of those things. So.
And you're not gonna get full pressurization in that room. Do you want full pressurization in that room? Probably not.
In an assisted living residence, honestly, yeah.
You know, you're extending the bass down of the speakers that are in the room, and that's perfectly fine. You know, it's a question of, budget. It's a question of what you want. It's a question of what you need. And yes, objectively, you could have better performance and you could have a more realistic thing. But these are people who are not going to a movie theater, clearly, right? And they want to have that sort of experience. This is darn close. And I applaud them for even installing anything, much less something of this quality. And yes, keep pushing for those panels because they need them. Donald, that's another comment here. Rob said that the Apple TV 4K isn't the best streaming box for YouTube, and one main reason is because it didn't used to support HDR from YouTube, but the second and third gen Apple TV 4K models do now. It's one of the main reasons Donald decided to pick up a new Apple TV 4K. And I think Andrew just got an Apple TV 4K.
He did.
As well.
He just got one. Yep.
So
Andrew over at AV Gadgets.
Yes. So he'll be reporting on that. Of course, there's currently the issue where if you have the match frame rate and match dynamic range turned on, there are unusually long HDMI handshakes that make you miss the first few seconds of a video after every ad break. But if you turn the match settings off, you can avoid those too. Whatever.
Yeah. So there you go. That's good. Glad that Apple TV is getting better support for YouTube. One day we'll have one box that's pretty darn okay at just about everything you might want to use. So that's good.
Yes. Greg tried. This is questions now. We're in the questions, not comments. Questions. Greg tried the press stop, then press top menu twice trick. I don't know what that is, but let's go. On his Panasonic UB820 Ultra HD Blu-ray player with a few of his Region B discs that he had imported. So clearly this changed the region on that.
Well, it doesn't change the region. It just lets you bypass the warning that usually just stays there on your screen and says, your player is not the correct region for this disc. But on the Panasonic players, if you press stop and then press top menu twice, it often bypasses it. Not every single time, though, as he will report.
It worked on some, but not all, so he went ahead and got a Region B player so that he can play all of his imported discs, since it was actually cheaper than getting either a Region free player or modifying his UB820. Yeah. He also got the 220-volt converter transformer that Rob suggested, and it's all working perfectly. He also discovered that the press stop, then top menu twice trick works on a lot of other discs to bypass the annoying forced trailers that play on a lot of discs. So that was a happy accident. Didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Now, The Region B player that he has imported is also a Panasonic, and straight out of the box, the remote ends up sending commands to both his UB820 and his new Region B player. Thankfully, the Region B player does not have the option to set the remote.
It does have the option.
I'm sorry, it does have the option to set the remote to Code 2 settings so that both players don't end up responding to every button press.
Yeah.
But he keeps all of his gear in the equipment closet, and he uses a Harmony Hub system to control everything. The Panasonic Code 2 commands don't seem to be in Harmony's database, and some Googling told him he'd just have to teach the commands to his Harmony one by one. Do we know of any faster, easier way? He can't exactly contact Harmony about it, can he? There is probably...
No.
A faster, easier way. The thing I would look into doing is getting the dedicated flasher out the back of the hub, if that's what I assume that's what you're using, and then putting it right on top of the input, and then putting electrical tape on top of that to make sure that nothing gets out.
Yeah, because you do have the option in the you have to use the Harmony app now, because apparently the desktop software just doesn't want to load anymore, so you're stuck using the Harmony app. But you do have the option. You have to dig down into the settings a little bit in that Harmony app, but basically you go into a particular device and you can program it so that the commands for that device are only sent out of a specific IR extender port on your Harmony Hub. So your Harmony Hub should have come with 2 extender blasters. Now, everything that comes in the Harmony Hub box is a blaster. There were the Precision IR little add-on pigtails. How easy it is to get a hold of those now, I'm not sure. Third-party ones do work, as long as it's a 2.5 millimeter plug, mono plug, not a 3.5 millimeter, as we normally see the smaller plugs that go in, but a 2.5 millimeter mono plug IR extender. You can use third-party ones. They do function plugged into the Harmony hubs. I guess you could also do one that's a 3.5 and then just get a 3.5 to 2.5 millimeter adapter plug.
I can't imagine that it would make any difference. Yeah.
That should be fine. But getting the official ones, the Harmony ones, that seems a little bit tricky at this point to get the Precision IR. But you can still just use one of the little blasters that came with in the package. And like Tom said, just make sure you wrap a bunch of electrical tape around. It doesn't have to look pretty. You've hidden it in a gear closet.
Cabinet anyway. Who cares?
Yeah. So that would be one method there. So in the app, you would then, for that device, say the commands for this device, they don't come out of the main hub. They only come out of port number 1 or port number 2. And then you just make sure that is only visible to that one device. So that's certainly one way to do this. I will just say you could give a try, because Harmony very often does in their database have the Code 2, Code 3 alternates for things. And for Panasonic, I'd be a little surprised if they honestly don't have it in there, but it's a little bit buried in the settings. So that one, if you go into the Harmony app again, you go into the menu and the Harmony setup and the add or edit devices section, there should be, for your Panasonic player, a device versions little sub-menu in there. And there, what you're looking for is change IR language, which maybe you just didn't think that was the thing that you were looking for, or just didn't find it because it's buried under edit devices and then device versions. But they do have a change IR language thing buried in that menu structure. And that's where you'll typically find the Code 2 or Code 3 for, things like Onkyo that I know definitely have different codes for their remotes in case you have multiple AV receivers. So for Panasonic, I'd be a little surprised if it absolutely isn't in there. But if all of that fails, then yes, you could just learn the commands one by one, because you can definitely do things as a learning. You have the original remote. So somewhere out of there will be a solution that works for you. And this is still usable.
Right. I will tell you that Andrew just bought another Harmony remote. Got one off of Facebook Marketplace for a ridiculous sum of money that was not high. It was low. It was lower than it should have been. And I was like, dude, if he's got any more, buy them all.
That's right.
And send some to me.
There you go.
Because I should. That's what I really should do, is set up alerts for that sort of thing. Right. I don't know what we're gonna do with my Harmony. I mean, I've got the Sofa Baton in a box up there, but I really don't want to take it out because I don't think it's gonna work very well. Dan, a couple of weeks ago, Dan asked about write-up in CE Pro from DPL's HDMI corner section titled, "Can your system's HDMI cables be too good?" It isn't available online, so Dan helped us obtain a copy so we could read exactly what it said rather than just speculating based on what Dan had relayed to us in his email previously. They described a particular troubleshooting venture in which an installation company had used nothing but 0.5 meter, 48 gigabits per rated HDMI cables, gigabits per second HDMI cables, but in a system where none of the components needed more than 18. One of the source devices was causing video glitches when it was plugged into the AV receiver, but it worked fine when it was plugged directly into the display. After extensive testing, DPL Labs discovered that if they attenuated the signal by either using a longer HDMI cable or coupling two of those specific half-meter HDMI cables together, as Lee predicted, plugging a cable into an attenuation dongle, everything worked fine, but they didn't specifically say it in their write-up, but it seems as though the signal was actually clipping when it went into the receiver. They mentioned how ultra-high-speed HDMI has several different levels of signal EQ available, and they are adaptive. But premium high-speed only has a single EQ level, and it is always applied no matter what. So since the signal chain was all 18 gigabits per second premium high-speed, but the cables were 48 gigabits per second ultra-high-speed, the EQ was actually boosting the signal strength a little too high when it went through the AV receiver. So Dan just wanted to return to his original question. Have we heard about this sort of issue using ultra-high-speed HDMI cables before, and should there be concern about simply getting ultra-high-speed HDMI cables just to be future-proof, and maybe we do need to get the matching HDMI cable for every source? Boy, let me just say that no matter what advice anybody gives, you can always find a very specific, very unique situation where that advice is not applicable.
Edge case for sure. This one, which is why they wrote about it.
HDMI cables, half-meter HDMI cables,
1.5 feet basically,
are extremely useless. Let's just be honest here. Those devices have to be almost literally sitting on top of each other.
I mean, and they said that all the cables in this setup, which, like, does that also mean from the AV receiver to the TV, which is like, how did they even do that? But anyway, this is what they said.
Okay. I mean, it's when you give advice. So we're on a podcast, right? And we're talking to let's call it a small group of people, but let's pretend they're bigger. There's a large audience, right? And we have to give our advice in such a way that is the most applicable to the most amount of people.
Sure.
I am never going to say you should match your HDMI cables to your devices, because the reality is in 99.999% of the times, like, I have never heard of this. Never heard of it.
Yeah.
Now, has it happened? Maybe. But you know what happens? People order their cables from Amazon or wherever. They plug them in. They go, this doesn't work. They send it back. They order a different one, which is longer or shorter or, less capable or more capable. And they plug it in and it works. And that's the end of it. They don't know what happened. And honestly, neither would we.
No.
We've seen this happen with HDMI constantly, where somebody comes with a problem, we give them a solution, and they're like, "It worked," and we're like, "Great." We're not sure why.
Yeah, it is specifically because this was a rare and unpredictable edge case that DPL Labs wrote about it in their HDMI corner. That was the point. It was a curiosity that they were proud of having solved, because they're one of the places that can do all of the authenticating of the HDMI licensing and that. So, like, they were just kind of proud of, like, okay, we actually figured out what the heck was going on here, because no one had any idea why this wasn't working. Like, they tested the cables to be like, okay, are the cables failing? Because that would make sense. But they're like, no, it turns out, like, the cables had so little signal loss that when the default EQ of premium high speed was applied, it ended up clipping because it was going through a repeating device, the AV receiver, that wound up boosting the signal too high.
Yeah.
But, like, yeah, it's a complete edge case. It was a
How
curiosity.
How many of you are going to order an HDMI cable and you're like, I bet I could do it with 1.5 feet?
Right.
Are you gonna go with, but I better get the meter long one just in case I have to move something or something. I mean, these are equipment racks where you have full access to the front and the back.
Yeah.
And these devices are within inches, if not closer to each other, with fans everywhere, and they're trying to keep the cable runs nice and
as
tight,
short as they possibly can. That's right.
Everything looks neat and everything looks professional and everything else. No one else is doing this. No
Sure.
one's doing this.
Yeah.
In fact,
And like
they're
they
not
said,
really doing it because this is the first and only time that's ever happened to them.
They took an ultra high speed cable, just one that was like your standard 6 foot, and that worked. So it was like, it was right on the edge of just clipping that signal. That's what that means, right? It means it was right on the edge, and any what we would consider normal length HDMI cable had enough single signal loss in it that even with the premium high speed EQ applied, it didn't clip the signal and you didn't have this problem. So yeah, I don't think this is honest. I mean, it is kind of a fun thing. That's why they wrote about it, but I don't think realistically we have to worry about it in virtually any realistic situation. Yeah. Go ahead and get.
I'll give you an example. Can I give you an example from my personal life for just a second? And this was one of the times that this threw me off so much, I almost fell off my bike. I was cycling, and I cycle 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a week. It's Florida, it's sunny and everything else. So normally in shorts and short sleeve shirts and shorts. And I have historically worn sunblock, of course, because I don't, want to get skin cancer or whatever. But you still get enough sun that you get these crazy, stupid tan lines, which cyclists are supposed to be proud of, but I'm not. And it's annoying. So, and I also got tired of spraying myself down with sunblock constantly. So now I wear sunblock on my face and neck and ears and all the parts that are exposed. But then I wear long, like these sleeves and leg sleeves that go with my shorts or whatever, and go underneath my shorts and then to my socks, and then same thing with my arms from underneath my shirt to my gloves, and just so I don't have to wear sunblock anymore. Yeah. And I had somebody come up next to me and they're like, "Have you ever had your vitamin D levels checked?" And I almost fell off my bike. I was like, "What are you like? I don't even know. Like, what's the right answer?" Because I don't want to continue this conversation. Like, what's the right answer? So I said, "I guess I don't know. I go to the doctor." Like, why? Like, oh well, you want to make sure you get enough vitamin D from the sun. I'm like, what are you even talking about?
Or you could drink milk or orange juice.
I could just walk around outside every once in a while if I'm absorbing that much from the sun, that I need. I mean, this is the exact same thing. It's like, you're worried about my vitamin D levels because while I'm cycling, I'm covering up more of my body than everybody else is. It's just such a weird case scenario that I'm like, I think I'm fine. I think
your ultra high speed HDMI cables are fine. Yes.
I think so too. We mentioned I did not mention this.
This was with Lee. Yeah.
This was mentioned. The iFi audio LAN there's too many eyes. Eye silencer.
Can't help it. That's what they've named it. We didn't put that in there.
And shared a laugh about how unnecessary and stupid it is, even for only $100. Like, people just have $100 lying around to give to other people. Dan has come across plenty of claims online about people hearing differences when they change their USB cable or optical cable as well. These types of audiophile claims are nothing new, but he doesn't want to just entirely dismiss something simply because it seems silly on the surface. When it comes to that LAN silencer, they talk about noise being a problem throughout your network. So let's put aside the specific audio claims for a moment. Is electrical noise or some sort of interference actually a thing at all when it comes to home networks? We're all sending tons of bandwidth around our homes these days. Is there any truth whatsoever to the idea of reduced network noise to improve performance? Okay, so we're sending wireless signals all over our homes, right?
For Wi-Fi, sure, yeah.
Yeah, right. So, and this is happened before to me in this home, and I've talked about this before, where I used to keep my microwave was basically near where the Echo Dot lived, like a little bit off to the side, and then the speaker was across the room. Like, these were on one side of the room, and the speaker was across the room from both of these other two things. Whenever the microwave would go off, the speaker would cut in and out.
Yeah, right.
Right, because the Bluetooth connection was getting interfered with.
Yeah.
So is there interference going on? I mean, it absolutely could be.
For Wi-Fi signals, there's piles of interference going on.
But we're talking about cables, like signals being sent through cables and external noise getting into those cables, or somehow throughout the network, the different devices that are connected together, and some cable is going to filter all that stuff out. First of all, if there were like if this was an analog connection, you would be able to hear it. You would be able to hear the noise just by, excuse me, turning on your speakers and turning the volume up and then listening. And if you change to a different source, then it would go away, so to speak.
Sure.
You would also be able to test this by putting one cable in and saying, "Oh, I hear some noise," and put a different cable in. No, I don't hear that noise. Okay, well that cable.
That's
is
how they do
shielded.
it with the audiophile LAN silencer. People do the comparison, and they absolutely convince themselves that they hear the difference.
Yeah.
But yeah.
We talk about I talk about this all the time on the podcast and on AV Gadgets as well. I do not give any credence to people who say that they have experienced a small difference, and that's what
in a digital signal in particular. Yeah. Well, so I mean, this is very similar to what I talked about last week when it just comes to noise in digital signals. I went through that last week, and just to quickly reiterate, like the idea that, yes, there is absolutely noise in our networks. There's definitely noise in our Wi-Fi signals. But with a digital signal, all that matters is, can you tell a peak from a trough? It's supposed to be an ideal square wave. It never is. Some of the corners get rounded. There's squiggles in what should be a square wave. Sometimes the whole signal gets attenuated, or there's like peaks that, show up there because it got interfered with another signal. But the whole point is, can the receiving device tell a peak from a trough? And as long as it can, it doesn't matter how horrible the quality of that peak versus trough came in. As long as you can tell them apart, it is digitally perfect, because it's one or the other, and there's no such thing as interpreting it anywhere in between. There are no degrees in the video signal. There's no degrees of 1 versus 0. It's just, can you tell them apart? So like what Tom was talking about with his microwave oven causing interference in his Bluetooth connection, it's like that was enough noise that it interfered with the receiving device being able to tell ones from zeros. Right. And you got whatever cutout in the signal or very obvious drops in the connection. This was not degrees. This was not, the high end sounds a little bit smoother. It's nothing like that. It's like obviously an error versus no error. And that is the way it's going to work. So is there such a thing as removing some of the noise in your home network, be that Wi-Fi or even wired? Like, yes, there is such a thing as decreasing noise in a digitally sent signal, but it only matters if you had so much interference and noise that it was causing the receiving device to be unable to tell a 1 from a 0 anymore. That is it. That is the entirety of it. So the notion that this is going to subtly improve your audio experience is completely bogus, and there's no reason to get this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We've got oodles of questions.
I know. I'm trying to find more links for this guy.
Okay.
Anyways, I will. There'll be some links for accessories for vinyl enthusiasts. A couple of turntable reviews that were done by Andrew, because he's got that whole thing going on over there.
We haven't even talked about that. You're trying to put in links for the next question that we haven't even said yet.
Oh, that's right. Oh, sorry. So he hasn't been into vinyl since the 70s, but he has to admit playing records is still kind of fun, and the resurgence of vinyl and turntables has piqued his interest. What's our advice for figuring out how to pick a turntable, a tone arm, a cartridge, a needle, and a phono preamp, and all of that? If you want to hear everything that vinyl records are capable of, how do you go about selecting the equipment? He's seen turntables anywhere from a couple $100 to, well, sky's the limit. Yeah. Like tens of, not hundreds of thousands of dollars.
That's right.
That seems wildly confusing. Okay. So I'm going to link up, and I was looking for it when we started this little conversation. Mm-hmm. But Andrew bought the project. He bought this, or he got it as a present or whatever from somebody in his family. The Project, so there's a hyphen in there.
Yeah.
Debut Carbon Evo, which is
very
like
popular online. Yep.
Very popular turntable by those who, are audiophiles or whatever. And he got this, and he was like, "It's the best thing ever." But he had already had some turntables in for review, or at least one in for review before that, of which I will link some of these up. Mm-hmm. And he was like, "Oh, this is so much better." I'm like, "But is it though? But is it?"
Indeed.
Let's go back and listen. And let me just tell you, the tenor of that review changed dramatically from the first, the rough draft to the final edit.
Yeah.
And you do not have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands or even hundreds of dollars, or at least thousands of dollars on
you might have to spend hundreds. Yeah.
Hundreds. Yes. Hundreds is good. on a turntable to get very good performance. And there's a couple of things to look for. And like I said, you will see some of these in these articles that I'm going to link up. But the reality is Audio-Technica makes like the cartridges for like everybody these days.
Pretty much. And their base turntable is the platform for lots of other brands.
A whole bunch of them. You know, and then all the stuff that people talk about as far as turntables and what makes them really good, you're like, that's aesthetics. It's literally aesthetics. It's just heavier, or it's cleaner, or it's, you know, it's made out of aircraft grade aluminum, or, you know, I don't know, you know, it looks like a cutting board. There's all sorts of different things in there. But the reality is the difference that's being made, it has a lot to do with how you set it up, which is not that hard. And Andrew will take you through that in some of these reviews. But it's also, you know, it requires a little bit of carefulness and maybe a couple of devices, but you get really good performance out of not a lot of money. So go ahead, Rob.
So I mean, I think the overarching answer he might have been hinting toward, because I mean, if you start reading audiophiles stereo only into phono stuff, it gets so heady and overwhelming that I think it's trying to make that comparison between, like, we've often said, okay, you can have a DAC that like just doesn't work or just doesn't support whatever file format you're feeding into it, or whatever bit rate and sampling frequency that you're trying to feed into it. It just doesn't do that. But if it does, we've gotten to the point with DACs these days, and we're talking the actual digital to analog conversion chip, as opposed to like a device, which is usually a combo device of a DAC and an amp or something like that. But anyway, just the actual chips, that we've gotten to the point where, like, look, it doesn't really matter, okay? As long as it actually does has the ability to handle the bit rate and sampling rate that you're feeding into it, there's not really any difference in terms. So you can get every tiny last drop of digital quality out of your digital to analog converter, as long as you have anything that's like just competent these days. There's not that difference to have. You go into the phono realm, and it's like people will just go to the ends of the universe with this stuff, and they will always hear a difference. It doesn't matter what they change, up or down, sideways in terms of price. They will always claim that they heard a difference. So there's no end to that, all right? I can't point you to any turntable in existence where every audiophile out there is going to agree that this one does everything that vinyl records are capable of. That you will never ever get.
It's like you're not allowed to have one and not change the cartridge on it immediately.
You gotta,
and the tone arm and everything else.
Right. So if you're looking for that type of answer, where you're going to be like, you're going to go to a forum, say, this is the turntable and the tone arm and the cartridge that I bought, and everyone is going to say, great job, you did great, you're never going to achieve that. Never. They will always tell you that something needs to be changed. It doesn't matter what it is. So put that out of your mind. I will just say, if you want to go get a turntable, here's what I'm going to look for in a turntable. It has to be able to spin the record at a consistent rate.
Yes.
Okay? Which, believe me, is far more rare than you might think. Because you want one that actually spins at the rate it's supposed to spin. I would like one that gives me the ability to adjust that rate of rotation. Because, believe it or not, there are records out there that were mastered at strange rates at the time, and being able to adjust that on your own turntable so that it isn't pitched up or down or faster or slower than how it should be listened to, that having that ability to adjust that is a really nice thing. I want a tone arm that is well balanced, and needles and a cartridge that aren't going to damage my records, and other than that, as long as they pick up the electrical signal properly, I'm going to be happy with it. So you can get all of that. In my opinion, you can get all of that from Audio-Technica for $350 with their LP120. That is the turntable I point absolutely everybody to if you're willing to spend that much. They have less expensive models that, don't have the S-shaped tone arm, so that means, the tracking force once you start getting to the middle of the record is a little bit more even if you use that S-shaped tone arm versus a perfectly straight tone arm. They have all the balancing, they have all the speed adjustment, it handles every type of record you could possibly throw at it, so I love recommending that. It also has a USB output if you want to digitize your records and record them on your computer and have a digital version. Because, look, one of the reasons I'm perfectly fine with people spinning vinyl is because there are lots of albums out there that were never digitized, or they just aren't available to download or buy on CD. And if you have a copy of that on vinyl, it's like, that has value. It doesn't exist in that recorded form anywhere else. Or it was remastered on CD and not very well. They completely took all the dynamics dynamic range out of it when they converted it to CD, whereas you have the original vinyl and it still has all the dynamic range in it. I'm like, that is tremendously valuable. I have zero problem with someone saying the vinyl version of this album is the best version that was ever released, because every digitized version of it since has been remastered and horribly dynamically compressed. That is just true for a lot of albums that are out there. So I have no problem people getting into vinyl, but I don't really see any need to go beyond the LP 120. Of course, there are people who are going to be, their minds are exploding at me saying that, but honestly, it has all the features and does everything very competently for $350.
Yeah. So I've linked up like a couple of reviews that Andrew has done. Some of them are more expensive, some of them are less expensive. They'll address a lot of things that Rob said. Also some accessories, like I said, that will help you dial in your performance of your thing. And a preamp that he bought for himself, the Fosse Audio Box X2, which has tubes on it. So that's
and by the way, that Audio-Technica doesn't need a separate preamp. It has the ability on the back to use the built-in preamp, which is perfectly fine. Or if you insist on having an external preamp, there's a little switch on the back of that Audio-Technica LP120 that lets you turn off the internal preamp, but otherwise it can send out a full line-level signal. You don't even need a separate preamp.
Most of these, I think, that he reviews has that ability. He got the preamp because one of the ones that he reviewed either didn't have the ability or... and he did find that the levels were a little higher when he used the preamp.
Well, it should be. That's what a phono preamp does. It takes the very tiny electrical signal that actually comes off of the needle and then preamplifies it.
The one that and I don't remember which one it was, the preamp that was built into the turntable was not as strong as the preamp, this external preamp, and that's why he got it. Plus, I don't think it was that much money. I think it was like $60 or $80 or something like that. It was really cheap. Speaking of Andrew, he says he spent his Saturday finding out what would happen if he painstakingly went through Rob's whole 12-step guide to setting up dual subwoofers, which is on both this website and AV Gadgets, and then running DRAC on his Onkyo AV receiver to its fullest using all 17 measurement positions. He ran some sweeps and test scenes when he was done, and gosh darn it really does sound seamless and perfectly dialed in now. It was arduous, which probably didn't have anything to do with the amount of pleasure he got from the after effect, but whatever. And certainly he feels now... The certainty. I see. But the certainty he feels now about his dual subwoofer setup just might have been worth it. The process also revealed some new rattles in his room that he wasn't aware of before. More weather stripping and museum putty on the way.
Good.
Good. So he still loves buying and selling used gear, and he came across a stereo package for $50, so he snapped it up. All he really wanted was the Denon tape deck, but it also came with a classic Denon stereo receiver and a pair of Energy ESM1 speakers that really do seem to play right down to 35 hertz like their spec sheet says. And there's a picture. You can see it.
You can see it.
These are all DIY panels, and there's a
the acoustic panels behind are DIY. Yeah.
Needs a rug. Okay, but whatever. He set up the Denon stereo receiver and the Energy speakers and has enjoyed listening to them alongside his regular home theater setup. That classic Denon receiver does not have any bass management or a subwoofer output, so he's wondering two things. First, how much should he be worried about adding a subwoofer to the setup? He's definitely hearing and feeling plenty of thump from these speakers to be enjoyable for all of the music he's thrown at them. But... should he maybe pick up a relatively inexpensive subwoofer to augment them? And any suggestions for a subwoofer model if he decides to go this route? I will say that I already talked to Andrew about this because he was texting me about this. And my thought, he's got a subwoofer in this picture, but it's in the same room as his home theater.
That's right, yeah.
So that subwoofer is not
part
connected
of this
to anything.
stereo only setup at the moment. Yeah, it's just where it was already physically.
So there are subwoofers that you can put line level into and line level out of. And that subwoofer that's sitting right there, that SVS, I believe is one of those subs that you can.
Well, these days in the current lineup, it's only the SB1000 Pro. That's the only one in SVS's lineup. Okay. So these days...
This is an older sub.
Yeah, this type of stuff, I'm pointing people to RSL because I like their speed woofers anyway. I think they're very good subs anyway. But one of their features is that they have... speaker wire inputs on the RSL Speedwoofer, both the 10S and the new 12S. So if you've got a big room, there aren't that many big high-powered subs that have speaker wire inputs anymore. It's a little bit rare. That Speedwoofer 12S, which I would put right up against a PB2000 Pro, no problem. Maybe even a PB3000, honestly, with the type of output and extension that it has on offer. So that's a big beefy sub. It's a big beefy sub physically too, but they have both options over there at RSL. So for that question, if you were going to add something at a somewhat reasonable price that can handle your room size, the RSL Speedwoofers is where I would point you if you really wanted to do that.
And I said to him not to bother.
Yeah,
basically is what my response to this was.
That's my honest, in this particular situation, that's my honest take too.
First of all, he's only playing music, and it's really only coming from either those tapes or you might hook a turntable up to it.
Sure.
So there is really no need for him to have a subwoofer output with speakers that are playing down, even if they're not even getting to 35, if they're only getting to 45 or something like that. That's plenty. And
I mean, of course, the bass is not going to be even, but then he's really only got one listening position when he's doing this stereo-only stuff. I mean, my honest take on what I would do is I'd have a 2-channel amplifier and I'd use the Zone 2 output of the AV receiver that you're already using for your home theater setup.
Yeah.
That would be another way to come at this. Yeah.
So he says, what about hooking this stereo setup to one of his existing subs, which is already positioned between this new pair of Energy speakers? He uses PB1000s with one at the front of the room, one at the back. Those do not have speaker wire inputs. So could he keep his front sub plugged into his regular home theater setup and also have
no, the original PB1000 did have speaker wire inputs.
Right.
I think I wrote it that way. Anyway, he's got a PB1000, not the new Pro. The Pro version, the PB1000 Pro doesn't, but the regular PB1000 does, and he has one of those. So he does have speaker wire inputs available to him.
Those do. That's what I said, right? Those do.
You said do not.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Those do have speaker wire inputs. So could he keep his front sub plugged into his regular home theater setup and then also have it connected to his stereo Denon receiver via speaker wire? Will that blow anything up? There's no way he's touching a subwoofer settings now that they're perfectly dialed in for his home theater. So it would even be worth connecting to his stereo setup. I didn't think that this was a good idea. And I told him to contact SVS to guarantee that.
Double check.
But generally speaking, you don't want to connect two different things to one speaker, like
having RCA inputs from two different AV receivers, that shouldn't be any problem because that's just like feeding separate left and right. So that should be any problem. I mean, it shouldn't be an issue having the speaker wire connection there because those are two separate inputs. So it shouldn't be a problem, but I agree. Just contacting SVS to double check is always a great idea.
I would be concerned about, if it's line level going in, line level going in one side and speaker levels going in the other. If this, if there's going to be any, I don't know what to call it, signal going back, any power going back down the line that's not in use at any given point. That's why I said contact SVS, because I was like, I don't know. This seems like, clearly this is not how subs are meant to be connected, and you're doing something that is unexpected.
It matters a little bit how it is internally wired, but like, for example, you can have the thing on most subs that do have speaker wire inputs where you have your front, left, and right speaker wires going in there, and then you also have an RCA connection from the same AV receiver, usually specifically for the LFE channel, which is only coming out that way. So that's usually, you can do that, and why that would be significantly different here. It should be all right.
The other problem is that he then has to use the internal crossover of the subwoofer.
Well, that's the bigger issue
for the line level stuff. The speaker level stuff. But the line level stuff, he wants to defeat that. So that means that he's going to have to remember to switch back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah, to me, that's the bigger issue, and the bigger reason I wouldn't do it is that there is no way you're going to get a lovely, perfect blend with that sub speaker wired to this stereo only setup without altering some of the settings. I mean, if you get highly unlikely lucky, then maybe. But in my opinion, there's almost no chance you're going to get a really nice blend without altering the settings on that subwoofer. You just said, I don't want to touch anything because I just dialed it in for my home theater. So, if you were going to do it, I'd say go grab an RSL Speedwoofer because they're fantastic, and I think you'll have fun adding that to the system. But I also probably just wouldn't. My real answer is I wouldn't do it.
How much are those? The RSL?
The 10S is $450 US, and the new 12S is $800.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So he's got glass IKEA cases, display cases with the Star Wars helmets in them. The base is about 15 by 17 inches. He wants to get a third display case, and he's thinking he'll make some DIY stands to make them a bit taller by about a foot. He wants to put a panel on the front to give the same Death Star aesthetic as the other panels in his room. And if you look at this, you'll get an idea of what he's talking about. We've got some images here, but basically, if you think of the walls of the Death Star and how they had lights behind like oval, squared off oval, I don't know how to describe those panels.
Rounded off rectangles.
That sounds good. It has that sort of vibe, and he's thinking about making that, but making them a little bit taller. If he fills those with DIY, if he fills the DIY stands with 15 by 17 by 12 inch, the base of it with insulation, so it'd be, some lights. Like a white fabric or something, acoustically transparent fabric, so the sound could get through. And then behind that would be filled with insulation. Would they benefit the acoustics at all? Would they act as additional absorption panels or bass traps? And again, I already talked to Andrew about this. I was like, they're going to do nothing, but
can't hoit
much.
Can't hurt, but yeah, I mean, way down by the floor, it's not like they're acting as reflection panels of any sort. For bass traps, I mean,
big enough to be bass.
There's not a lot of surface area exposed.
Yeah.
So the main reason I would say I would put insulation inside of these bases, not so much that I think they're going to be highly effective audible acoustic panels of any sort, but just so that you don't have resonance inside of these hollow stands that you're creating. It's not going to hurt anything. I just don't think it's going to be audible.
Yeah, I would say even if your room was completely untreated and you did this, you'd be like, I don't think it really did anything.
Yeah.
I think would be your reaction. And you already have a very highly treated room.
That's right.
It's going to be I don't
think you're going to notice it whatsoever. But you might notice if the stand started resonating at certain frequencies, so it'll help cut that down.
Make sure you order a lot of museum putty anyways. You're gonna need it. Nathan, Rob recently said that he wouldn't bother upgrading an existing Ultra HD Blu-ray player to one of the Panasonic players if your display is an LG OLED that has its own frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. To be frank, Nathan thinks LG's dynamic tone mapping on their OLED panels looks pleasing too, but we're all fans of Vincent Teo from HDTV Test, and he posted an explanation a little while ago about why he doesn't recommend using LG's dynamic tone mapping and why he prefers Panasonic's HDR optimizer instead, even for LG OLEDs. What's our response? Shut up, Vincent.
No, that's not my response.
Nuh-uh. That's my response. Nuh-uh.
Okay. That's Tom's, not mine. I mean, look.
I mean, I think this. I'm just going to give you my opinion.
Sure.
Out of all the things to argue or even worry about, just using either of them is like a step so far beyond most consumers and users of these things. Just knowing that they do a thing that you might want to have done is so far beyond that arguing which one over the other is like, well, I prefer scones made from here. No, I prefer scones made from there. They're both freaking scones. They're delicious. Shut up. But that's my uneducated, unresearched opinion. Go ahead, Rob.
Okay.
Tell us the.
So I leave most of this to what Vincent said for himself in that video, which is he is a video purist. He knows that about himself. When he watches something, he's going to make sure his room has the lighting set to exactly the correct level that you should have, like in a mastering suite, which now for HDR is 5 nits, very, very dim. But he's going to make sure that he has that sort of thing, and he is a video purist. When the signal says, give me 0.63 nits for this object on screen, that's what he wants to measure and see, and nothing else. And I have no problem with that. If I'm able to control my viewing environment to be exactly right, like it is a mastering studio, that's what I want too. And in which case, I would not want to turn on LG's dynamic tone mapping for that setting, because LG's dynamic tone mapping raises the shadow detail. It absolutely does. And that's exactly what Vincent describes. That's why he says it's not what he recommends as a video purist who goes to all the effort to get the viewing environment correct, because it makes shadows brighter than what the signal actually called for. Now, this harkens back to what I was talking about when Lee was here about like what the Lumagen Radiance video processor or the Mad VR Envy processor do by default, which is a similar thing. They raise shadow detail because they know it's projector owners predominantly who are using those external video processors, and projectors can't get to true zero nit black to begin with, and then they're typically in an environment where even if it's pitch black in the room, you have a little bit of light scattered back on the screen. So they raise that shadow detail a little bit beyond what the signal actually called for, so you can see those details more clearly. On the LG OLEDs, I generally find their dynamic tone mapping pleasing, because if I have more than 5 nits in my room, which even I will watch things with a room brighter than that, it just makes those shadow details that much easier to see. And in general, it looks pleasing because you don't have any shadow detail being crushed. You're not missing anything that you were supposed to just barely be able to see, but if your room's any brighter than 5 nits, you can't see it anymore. They raise that up because they're like, yeah, most people are watching in a room that's brighter than that. So I don't actually think Vincent Teo, if you talk to him in person, would have any problem with somebody who says, look, I'm using it in my living room and HDR just looks better when I turned on. He'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. He's not an unreasonable man. He explains very clearly that for the video
you don't know, he could
purist,
be completely unreasonable. What are you talking about?
I've seen him on Twitter. He's a very reasonable guy. So I'm like, he explains very clearly.
Nobody ever misrepresents themselves on Twitter.
For the video purist who wants exactly the number of nits that came out of the signal to be what comes off the display, you wouldn't want to turn it on because there's no way to get back to exactly that scenario. So that'll make sense. The HDR optimizer he prefers because unless you turn on LG's dynamic tone mapping, if you just leave it at its regular tone mapping without any frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, they roll off the very high-end detail in HDR signals. It just starts to clip it off, right? Things just fade to full white. Whereas if you set the Panasonic HDR optimizer, you can have it pre-tone map things to retain more of that detail. So he's like, look, I want the shadows to be exactly what the signal called for, and then I want to see as much highlight detail as I possibly can. All of that is completely logical. All of it makes sense, but it is completely dependent on you having the correct viewing environment and being willing to go to that extreme.
Nuh-Uh, Vincent.
That's right.
Suck it. No, it's funny too because people, and I'm not Nathan. I'm not calling you out or saying anything about you in particular.
No, he was having a bit of fun with it too, Nathan.
Oh yeah, for sure. We're all, for the most part, pretty reasonable people. You can tell the unreasonable ones when they start making like these blanket, like, well, that, high bit rate is always better than low bit rate, and like, okay.
I mean, the people who don't like that we chuckle and laugh at all this stuff. We should be taking it dead seriously.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Never have anything.
But I'm sure Vincent, everybody's got their own use. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to somebody's house and I'm like, well, this is just all wrong. But for them, they're like, oh, I think it sounds great. I'm like, well, then we're done. We're done. There's no more conversation to be had. This is your house.
Why would I force you to change it?
Yeah. I mean, because I can't. But if I could,
right.
I definitely would. Okay, Micah recently bought an Onkyo TX NR7100 receiver and a set of 5 Emotiva speakers, the T2 Plus towers. I guess that's a plus, right? It's a plus?
Yes.
Okay. T2 Plus towers, a B1 Plus bookshelf surrounds, and C1 Plus center. He's using them with an SVS SB12 NSD subwoofer that he already owned. His room is in a finished basement. The room itself is about 12 by 35 feet with 8-foot ceilings. Half of the room is used as a theater, so it's open to the other half, which has a nice big table for playing tabletop games and doing puzzles and whatnot. You play D&D, just admit it. It's fine.
Sounds like.
I am 100% on board with that.
Listen to the very beginning of this podcast. We're on board.
if you have a 40K army thing set up over there too, I'm all for that. I'll try not to touch anything. I'll probably fail. He asks, what should he do in terms of dual subwoofers? SVS suggests that if he wants to continue with his SB12 NSD, then a regular SB1000, not the SB1000 Pro, would be a good counterpart, since they don't sell the SB12 NSD anymore. But should he consider going with a larger, more powerful subwoofer model? Also, he has an ELAC S10 subwoofer on hand that he's using at the moment. Would it be okay to pair that with his SB12 NSD in this room, or would that be a bad idea? First of all, we are the last people on the earth that's ever going to argue with SVS about which subwoofer you should use. So if they say that those pair pretty well together, then you could look at the specs. They don't really lie.
Oh, yeah.
If they line up, they line up. I mean, that's
certainly in terms of having two subs that are very, very similar in their specs and output. Yes, SB1000 and SB12 NSD. There would be zero problem using those as essentially two identical subs. I will also say on your last part, the ELAC S10, even though, yes, okay, by the specs, it's minus 3 dB point, is about 35 hertz, whereas on the SB12 NSD, it's about 25 hertz for the minus 3 dB point. Like, They aren't actually so drastically far apart, because like the S10 is a ported 10-inch model, the SB12 NSD is a sealed 12-inch model, and if you actually get them like level matched and everything, they aren't so worlds apart that I would complain about using those two subs together. So given that you already own both of those subs and you don't have to spend a penny to just try it out, this isn't one where I'm like, oh, one of them is so drastically different from the other that you really shouldn't use them together. It's like, are the ELAC S10 and the SVS SB12 NSD identical? No, they're not identical, but they're close enough, honestly, that I wouldn't have any problem using them together. I just come, though, ultimately to like my full-on answer to this, right? 12 feet by 35 feet by 8 feet. That is a bigger room than you're going to be able to pressurize with a pair of essentially SB1000s, right? Yeah. Subs that have about the output and extension of SB1000. That's a bigger room than you can fully pressurize with that.
I agree.
And for bass, you can't just say, okay, only half of this room is the theater, so only pressurize that half, and the other half of this room that's completely open, just don't send any bass over there. Keep it all in this little, designated area. There's no way to do that. The air is going to move wherever the air can move. So, my answer would be, if you want the full on, I want to pressurize this theater area, but essentially this entire 12 by 35 foot by 8 foot room. If you want to pressurize that whole thing right up to full reference volume, I don't know if that's a goal you have in mind, but you'd need to get, bigger, more powerful subs than that. I think, honestly, like you could probably stop at a PB1000 Pro. Like a pair of those, right? But that would be the ported, 1000 Pro series. Yeah, much, much physically bigger, much, much louder output, especially at 20 hertz versus, the S10 ELAC or the sealed 12 NSD. So, much, much higher output. If someone's going to crunch the numbers and say you want 115 decibels at 20 hertz, you're actually going to need to go even bigger than the 1000 Pro. The alternative, of course, would be like Monolith's M10 V2 would be another great choice here. Personally, I don't think, it doesn't sound like this is a, completely dedicated, I can play it ridiculously loud type of room. This is a shared space. So I think those are the reasonable subs to target if you want to go beyond. But if you're like, honestly, I don't need a whole lot louder and lower than what my SB12 NSD is giving me. I just want more uniform bass. I would say absolutely start by just pairing up your ELAC S10 because it's not that far off.
Yeah. And I would say get bigger subs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's my real answer, too. Yeah.
That's kind of where I linked that up for you already, Rob.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
That's kind of where I land on this. This sub is not big enough for this space, and if you're going, a lot of times people are like, well, if somebody's playing games, I don't want to blow them out of the room with the subwoofer. I'm like, yeah, but does that happen that often? And even if it does, you're talking about turning the movie down a little bit, or maybe a lot, while people are playing in the other room, which is what you're going to be doing anyways, no matter what's going on, what size subwoofer you have. You're never going to be playing full reference volume, but because your subs are too small, now people can totally play a game right next to you. You could
put it into night mode, for that time. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Or use the low frequency containment. You can do that type of thing. I don't know if his room is set up side by side, or like the back is what's open of his theater area versus the right hand side or something like that. But I mean, it very well could turn out that one of the subs ends up on one of the 12-foot walls, and the other sub ends up 35 feet away on the other 12-foot wall, which is definitely inside of the games area, no matter which way things are oriented. For getting the uniform bass throughout this room, that might be the setup. So there's no way
you just have to remember, even though that sub, there's like one sub physically close to them and one sub far away from them, that's not how bass works in this room.
Nope.
So even though the sub,
It's
like, I don't want to put the sub right next to the table, it'll be too loud. It's gonna be too loud no matter where it is in the room. Okay? It doesn't matter that it's next to you. You're not hearing the sound from the sub. You're hearing the bass from the room. Yeah. So that's when we talk about pressurizing a room. That's what we're talking about. It's the entire space is pressurized.
It wouldn't matter where you are in it.
That's
if
right.
you get to pressurization.
It is not a direct line. It's not like a speaker, and this is why I said subwoofers are like magic to people. A speaker, you move the speaker farther away from you, it gets quieter. You move the subwoofer in the room further away from you, it's the same volume. It doesn't change. And therefore, you can put it right next to the table, or you could put it all the way across the room. It's going to be the same volume. And that it's not intuitive. It's not what people think of speakers and how they work, but it is how they work.
It's what you're hearing is all the sound that was contained in that room and reflected back to you.
Yes.
So that's why.
So his Onkyo receiver has 2 subwoofer outputs, but that's just an internal Y splitter, which is good. The signal is mono, and he's read through Rob's 12-step guide for setting up dual subwoofers. What would be his best method for setting up the dual subs in this room? Because he's also heard about using a mini DSP 2x4 HD. But would that actually help him in this case, or would it only be useful if he were to add a 3rd or 4th sub? The thing here is when one, like in my room, both subs are like within a foot or two of the distance from my main listening position.
Yeah.
Okay. In your room, you can achieve similar results if, let's say that, because I assume that the 35 length is the width. Right, so if you
it's probably a side by side.
It is probably a side by side where there's the game room on one side and the home theater on the other side, right? So if you put the subwoofers so that they are in the midpoints of those 35-foot walls, which would be in the midpoint of, even if they're a little bit off center from each other, they're mirrored. You're essentially, the subwoofers are about the same distance, close enough to the microphone, and then you're fine. Then you just run it and life is good. Now, if you're going to put it in the midpoint of the smaller walls, which I forget the distance,
the 12-foot walls,
12-foot walls, and then one sub is in the theater and one sub is all the way across the room at the other theater.
That's right.
Then you start looking at the mini DSP as being something that you're doing.
I mean, the thing is, the 12 NSD, the SB12 NSD, it has fully variable phase, just like all SVS subwoofers do.
It does.
So, I think what he's getting at is, like, adding the Mini DSP 2x4 HD, it doesn't automate any of this.
No.
All it does is add more manual control that you can, because you have a sub that already has fully variable phase, you can already achieve what you need to achieve, right? The Mini DSP 2x4 HD is very handy if you're using 3 or 4 subs and you're going to run the multi-sub optimizer software,
right?
Which, again, even though it's called multi-sub optimizer, it doesn't mean automated. It just calculates the figures that you have to enter into a device such as the Mini DSP 2x4 HD, but none of this is automated. So I don't think you're going to like buy the Mini DSP 2x4 HD for a 2 subwoofer setup and be like, oh, that solved all my problems. It's like, no, it just gave you more dials that you could adjust. It doesn't make it automated or easier in any way. So I think, follow my 12-step guide. Honestly, you might only need to follow the first 4 steps. Most people do. That's usually all you actually need to do is follow the first 4 steps. If you do that, you've got sufficient controls already built into the subwoofers that you own. That's what you're going to do. Just make sure, if you're sticking with the ELAC and the SVS and not purchasing anything, make sure the SVS is physically closer to you, because that's the one that has the fully variable phase.
So he's picked up from listening to us for a few months that he should probably look into adding acoustic treatments to his room. Did you glean that? It's a subtle.
It's something we've mentioned.
It's a subtle undercurrent in this. We never mention it directly. He thinks he'll go with Acoustimac panels, which are apparently here in Tampa, I think. I need to go and visit them. They offer 3 different core materials: mineral wool, Owens Core 703, or Eco Core. Acoustimax data seem to indicate they all perform very similarly, but do we have any guidance as to the best choice? What's on sale? Literally, the difference in performance is negligible. Just buy the cheapest one.
Yep, that's why they offer it. That's why they don't make any different claims as to the performance of what it's going to be, because there's essentially no difference in the performance. So whatever one is cheapest, and sometimes they have some, they got a whole pallet full of it and it's cheaper right now, any one of those. So get whatever's cheapest. They all work great.
And yes, you can mix and match them if later on down the line you
sure
add some more, and then you're like, oh, well, I got this one before, so I should get the same. No, doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
They're all the same. They're all the same. Don't worry about it. So he says, if he continues using just a single sub for the moment, would adding bass traps make a big difference, or would he only benefit from bass traps if he adds a second subwoofer? It will make a big difference. And it's not just bass traps. We're talking about acoustic panels too. I mean,
but bass traps very specifically, that is where we want to start and emphasize first. If you're going to add anything, add bass traps first. And counterintuitively, it's not about the deep, deep, deep bass where passive corner bass traps make any difference. It's in the range where the subwoofer crosses over to your speakers. So that's why it doesn't matter if you're using 1 sub, 2 sub, 3 subs, 4 subs. It doesn't matter how many subs you're using. You still need those bass traps because they're treating the region that is very difficult to treat any other way, that crossover region between your speakers and subs. That's where they can really help to even things out. So absolutely go for corner bass traps first.
Yes. The Emotiva bookshelf speakers are rated at 8 ohms, but his front 3 speakers are all rated at 4. His Onkyo receiver has 2 speaker impedance settings. Please don't touch that switch. 4 ohms or 6 ohms or above, which is the default. The manual doesn't really go into any detail or to explain, so how should he set that? The highest one possible. All the smaller number ohms, all it does is limit the amount of power that the receiver can put out.
It is literally a current choke. It just stops current from going through.
So let's remember that, if you look at a receiver, an amplifier's specs, they'll say 100 watts into 8 ohms, 200 watts into 4 ohms.
Sure.
It has the same amount of, nothing's changed inside the receiver for that. But the draw from, and I know that one dude's going to get mad at me for saying it that way. But when you hook an 8 ohm speaker up to it, it requests to get to a certain sound level, it's going to request 100 watts of power. Sure. 4 ohm speaker is we're going to request double that because of how Ohm's law works. Okay, so the same thing is happening here, except now you're saying to the receiver, I've got a speaker that might request a whole bunch of power. Be ready for it. And they're like, okay, we're going to hold back to make sure that we don't clip.
That's right.
And that's all it's doing. And you're like, well, let me tell you right now, sir, you are not sitting far enough away that you have to worry about these things. So just leave it at the top one, give it all the power available. You will not be clipping.
Yeah,
you will be
don't
fine.
deploy the choke. Just leave it at the default 6 ohms or higher. Leave it at that setting.
In a different room and setup in his small office, he's got his desktop PC that he also uses for gaming sometimes. He's got a pair of ELAC Debut F5 towers that aren't being used at the moment. They'd be overkill, but he's thinking he'd like to put them in his office. He'd like to connect them to his PC using the PC's USB output for the audio signal. So which DAC plus speaker amp would we recommend? At most, he'll be 3 feet from these speakers, so he's thinking a small, low-power amplifier will be just fine. We're correct? And the answer to that is, oh, yeah.
Yeah, you don't need
a fraction of a watt.
That's right. So I like the Fosse's, of course. Fosse's DA2120C is the one that I usually point to. It's going for $170 right now. So a nice little Class D amplifier, 60 watts per channel. They say 120, but that's into a 4 ohm. Into an 8 ohm, it's going to be 60 watts per channel. So has USB input, has Bluetooth input, optical coax, has a dedicated subwoofer output. So if you end up getting the second sub and you still want to use that ELAC sub that you have on hand and you can bring it into the office, there's a dedicated subwoofer output on the back of this DA2120C from Fosse as well. Now, they do have an even lower powered, less expensive version, which is the DA2120A. So that's 25 watts per channel. So that's getting pretty low, but for honestly 3 feet away, that'd be fine too. So if you just want the even lower price, that one's just $125 and even smaller size, but still the same complement of inputs and that dedicated subwoofer output if you want to add it. That's a perfectly fine choice in this scenario too. So any of those will get the job done for you just nicely.
And it's crazy. I know that people are like, well, you got these big old speakers, you need a big old amp. No. you're sitting so close. You're sitting so close. You're gonna have the biggest problem I feel like with getting big speakers and sitting this close to them is having them resolve any sort of coherent soundstage / imaging / any of that.
But for PC uses where you just got some music in the background, it's still fine.
Well, I don't know what exactly you're doing. How loud you're going to be having it. What you don't want to do, and this is we are assuming you are sitting at your desk with your speakers and listening to music. I don't want you to call us or to email us back and say, I blew up my amp. And we're going to say, how did you do that? And you say, well, I was playing background music and I was vacuuming. Okay, listen, my dude.
Or I had the door open and I was 2 rooms away.
Yeah. This advice only works if you are sitting in your seat within 3 feet of your speakers.
Although if you go with that 2120C with the 60 watts per channel, you can play it pretty darn loud.
You can, but you still want to be careful. You're going to clip something eventually, and it will be easier to do than you think.
Pretty darn loud with that C version. The A version, you're going to want to keep it toned down.
Yeah. David. After David's odyssey of trying to get his 4300H receiver repaired at a local shop, he wound up simply ordering a Denon factory refurbished 6700H so that he can finally try using all 13 speakers they installed in his room a while ago. He spotted a few minor quality control issues. They didn't log the unit out of the previous owner's HEOS account. They sent AAA batteries, even though the remote uses AA. Very strange. And they didn't include the sheet of speaker wire label stickers that even though they said that all the original accessories would be included, nothing worth sending the unit back over, but not quite perfect. I bet if you email them, they'll send you those stupid stickers.
They'll send you the stickers if you email them, yep, for sure. They'll probably send you some AA batteries, too, honestly. If you
I'll
just
be honest, I've never seen those stickers. I don't even know what those stickers look like. So he's been without a functioning receiver in his home theater for 3 months now, so he certainly cannot say that there's any sort of A-B comparison, but he was just a tiny bit disappointed that, other than going from 9 to 13 speakers, really nothing else has changed, and its interface and app look exactly the same as they did back in 2017. Odyssey is the same. It's been a long time. There's no immediate obvious difference in the sound quality or anything. It's all a bit of an anticlimax, which is why people convince themselves there's a change when there's not.
Yeah. Good on you for not. Good on you for being like, yeah, sounds the same.
Yep.
More speakers making noise, still sounds the same.
Believe me, when I went from the 4,000 to 4,300, I was like, yep, that's a different receiver. It looks exactly the same. It sounds exactly the same. And everything about it seems the same. That's it.
Yeah.
So his 4300H had HEOS, just like the 6700H does, but he's never used it before. He's using it now and enjoys being able to have music playing without needing to turn on his projector. He also signed up for Tidal for the first time. I will tell you, Andrew had Tidal for a short period of time and then eventually went back to Apple Music because he thought it sounded just as good and had more stuff and more music available. When he used his Fire TV Cube to play Tidal, he found a whole selection of Atmos music and he thought it sounded amazing. But when he plays Tidal via HEOS, Atmos music tracks don't show up in search and there doesn't seem to be any way to play them. Thanks, Amazon. You ruined everything. He did notice that in the specs listed on Denon's website, the newer 3800H and 4800H list Dolby Atmos music specifically as a feature. Does that mean HEOS will do Atmos music from Tidal on the newest Denon models, but not the older ones? If not, what is that spec sheet listing all about? I don't know, but I'll tell you right now, just because it says it can do a thing doesn't mean it can do a thing from an app. There's many other things that have to happen in order to make all these things work, and not the least of which is app support. Can we talk about YouTube being in stereo for the longest time?
I know.
Before we start thinking.
They did 5.1 for like a little while there, and then they went back.
So you should realize and know that just because it says it can do spatial audio or Dolby Atmos audio or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that the Tidal app will be able to do it because, of course, it can. I'm going to let Rob answer this while I go get some more coffee.
As you described yourself, nothing has really changed as far as the apps go with the Denon models. So HEOS is not listed under Tidal's supported devices for playing back Atmos music from the Tidal service. So they're not in that HEOS app, as far as I know. If somebody is able to correct me, that's great. But as far as I'm aware, it isn't in that HEOS app. So that's the issue. They do list the Apple TV 4K. They do list the Amazon Fire TV as being devices that support Atmos music from Tidal. So that's why it works there through your Fire TV Cube, but not through the HEOS app, unfortunately. So in terms of what does that Atmos music listing in the Denon's spec sheet refer to, I mean, it's just under the supported formats. So I think they're just trying to make it explicit because, like, back when the 6700H came out, there were some places doing Dolby Atmos music, but it wasn't particularly widespread. Now it's a little bit more widespread that more services are offering Dolby Atmos music. So I think they just wanted to like have that in there in case someone's looking for that feature. Honestly, it was never any different. It was never a different thing to be able to play Dolby Atmos music versus Dolby Atmos from discs or from streaming video services. But I think they just put it in there as like a checkmark item so that people were like, does this work with Dolby Atmos music? Yes, it does, but not from its own built-in HEOS. It works from, you plug in a device that supplies Dolby Atmos music and it'll play it back. It's just listed there as a supported format, just like regular Dolby Atmos, DTS-X, Oro 3D, like all of those things are there. They just have it as another checklist items as far as I can tell. So moving on to his next question, he heard an issue coming from his left top rear speaker and his left top front speaker. Those are in-ceiling speakers. We recommended that he just power them using the X6700H itself, and that's what he's done for the time being. He's hearing like a loud buzz/hum coming from just those two speakers. The other four in-ceiling speakers are all perfectly fine, silent noise floor. His 7 floor level speakers, which are being powered by a monolith 7-channel amp, an external amp, those are also dead silent. When the signal's not playing, you just listen to the idle noise floor. Everything else is dead silent. So after a while, the loud buzz/hum went away from those two speakers on its own. But if he put his ear right up close, climbed up there, and stuck his ear right close to them, he could still hear what he calls a slight staticky sound coming just out of those two speakers. So he went back to his equipment closet outside of the home theater. He couldn't locate any obvious problems. He's like, should he be highly concerned? Is this a problem with his refurbished X6700H that he just got? Because he's like, should I send it back, get a different unit? So, I mean, for that, what you just described, I mean, I guess to be thorough, it's not out of the question that it's in the AV receiver, but that sure as heck sounds like you just picked up some interference somewhere along the speaker wires for those two particular speaker runs. As I've talked about before, if you have a speaker wire that's like draped over top of a high-powered device, including the amplifier itself, like you route the speaker wire under the amplifier or over the amplifier, and we know he's got this gigantic, very powerful monolith 7-channel amplifier somewhere in the vicinity. If you have those speaker wires sort of coming anywhere near that device, they can easily pick up that type of noise. I've had it. And the fact that it kind of like went away on its own, I'm like, okay, did you like maybe put things into standby and that monolith 7-channel amplifier went into standby and wasn't having current flowing through it anymore, and that's when the sound went away? That type of thing could easily explain this. I think that's more likely than there actually being a problem with your X6700H because, yeah, that seems like the most likely thing. So this could be a bit of cable management, speaker wire routing that needs to take place here because, yeah, if those are coming relatively close to any high-power device like that monolith 7-channel amp, that could easily explain what was going on.
Yeah, I remember somebody saying they had their... God, I don't even remember how this worked out. I think they had a cable run from their equipment closet to speakers someplace else, but the speaker wire was disconnected, I believe. Yep. And then it started picking up radio frequency, radio waves.
It'll be an antenna.
And the speaker started playing the radio very quietly because there's no power to it, but it still started playing it. So you'd be surprised, how much stuff can happen there. So, just check your wires, and then if it keeps happening, well, then obviously contact Denon and you get those new receiver as well as stickers. Going back to his failed 4300H, as far as he and that stereo shop owner can tell, there was just a single blown amplifier channel, but that shut the entire unit down. It wouldn't even power up. The stereo shop owner didn't dislike Denon in particular. He dislikes all modern AV receivers. We know that. Yeah. Was that ever a question?
I think I don't know. It was just the wording from last time. He thought he was only done in a particular.
No. I just assumed that he didn't like anything that hasn't come from the 70s.
That's pretty much one of these things he's about to say. Very much indicates that.
Yeah, that's what most of these people like. They're like, when I was young, everything was good, and now everything's crap. Yeah, let's not talk about that. They say he disliked all modern AV receivers, saying they all use substandard manufacturing with lead-free solder that breaks down, and designs like that fail completely if a single component fails. That is just not true, but whatever.
Yeah.
Loser.
I mean, the lead-free solder is true. There's a reason we've taken lead out of a lot of things. It's toxic.
Because of all the death it was causing, and disfigurement. And birth defects.
And once again, all modern AV receivers, they're all failing, just left and right. They're all failing. 2-3 years. There's not a single Denon or Anthem or Yamaha or Onkyo or Pioneer or Arcam or anybody. They're all just failing left and right. 2 years, that's as long as they make it. They're all just crap. Every single one of them. Obviously true.
So David is very risk averse and hates that a single failed amp channel in his 4300H basically forced a full receiver replacement. So we'd like to know why the rest of the receiver can't keep functioning when just a single amplifier channel blows. With this monolith amp, if a single amp channel develops a problem, will all 6 of the other channels stop functioning too? If not, that would make him feel more inclined to go with separates. There is no, I've had AV receivers where I have blown an amplifier channel. I have done that. This was before there were protection modes on AV receivers. Can I help you, miss? Can you just settle down back there?
There's a doggo behind Tom for the audio-only listeners.
She's going crazy.
Yeah.
What's going on? So I have blown the amplifier channel in a Denon receiver before. There was like the 3508 or 3805, whatever that one was.
3805, yep.
Yeah, that was so popular. And I blew one channel in that. Was it that one? Anyways, might not have been that receiver. Anyways, I blew an amplifier channel. You know how I knew it? Because it was the only speaker that wasn't playing.
Right.
That's normally how this goes. First of all, David, I don't believe anything out of this man's mouth, okay? Not that I think he's lying or that I think he's purposely misleading you. I think that he is looking for the solution, the explanation that fits his narrative. And I think that's just normal psychology, and I don't think he's doing anything to deceive you in any way. But I think he believes that all AV I don't think so. He believes all AV receivers are crap. Therefore, any explanation that comes to him as he's doing his investigation that supports that is as far as that investigation is going to go.
Sure.
Something happened here that was more than just a single amplifier channel blowing. Something worse happened. Okay, we know this because the entire receiver wouldn't power on. In every other situation where a single amplifier channel is blown, you can still power on the AV receiver. You just won't have that power.
Going back in the story, we know this happened with a APC unit that was having a fault, was giving off a beep, and saying, don't keep going. There's something wrong here. So, I mean, the thing is, yes, the AV receiver all shares one power supply.
Yeah.
So I think there's an issue that wasn't discovered yet. I do think one amplifier channel very obviously blew. They put their multimeters on it and found this one amplifier channel that was completely dead.
Yes.
But I think there was a not yet discovered at this stereo shop who never performed the repair that they said they were going to. I think there was also a problem in the power supply, and that's why the entire unit just wouldn't power on at all. Now, if in your monolith amplifier, a single component in one blade of one amplifier goes wrong, the rest will probably still function. If a problem happens in the power supply, the whole thing is going to shut down.
Yes. Okay. There is no other way to say this other than this was more catastrophic than this person is saying.
Right.
And I think you know that. I think whatever you're getting worried about all this stuff that this person is saying, I think if you take a step back, just like you took a step back from your new Denon, so it kind of sounds the same as my old Denon. I think if you take a step back and you're like, this is not just a simple amplifier channel blowing, because look at where the source of the problem was. It was from a faulty APC unit that you should have unplugged from before, and you didn't, and then who knows what it did to your AV receiver and everything else? Who knows what it did?
Well, the chances of damaging something in the power supply are quite high.
Yes.
There's nothing surprising about that. So
I'm telling you, yes. So I don't know what answer you're looking for from us, Because we've already given you this answer a couple of times.
I mean, I think he just wants to get components where he can replace each individual thing, which is difficult. Yeah. We don't have super separates.
Monoblocks.
But I mean, look, if you want to get monoblocks and you want to get separates, like, we're not going to stop you, but we're just going to tell you it's not necessary. You are more fearful than the evidence needs you to be because you've had one person who's told you very bad things, and you don't need to listen to that.
Who's clearly not, I don't want to say unhinged, but who is clearly not, it has got very obvious biases that they have told you about.
Yeah.
And you could say that we have biases in the other direction, but that's not true. Rob is sitting there with an ATI amp for speakers that he sits within arm's length of.
That's right.
We
literally,
we have biases towards rational explanations in science. This person has a narrative that they believe that supports their business. Okay? And I don't mean that in a way that I'm saying they're nefarious. I think that it makes sense that a person who has a business where the business is, I fix high-end equipment, everything that they believe goes into supporting that business model. I mean, why would they have the business otherwise? So it's fine that they feel this way. Do I think it's right or it's rational? I do not. I think he's wrong, and I think if he actually looked at it, he would know he was wrong, but he has no motivation to do so, because why would he? Let's go on. Kiran in India. Kiran would like to better understand why different subwoofers can have vastly different amplifier wattage specs. He recalls this old 12-inch MQA subwoofer that used a 200-watt amp. He eventually replaced that with a rhythmic subwoofer with a 500-watt amp, and he remembers how he honestly didn't notice much of a difference despite the extra power. Wow, that's not nearly enough information to diagnose that particular issue, yes. But let's just go on.
But even if, I mean, I'll just address that very quickly. Even if, let's say, the 12-inch drivers were identical, the cabinet size was identical, and the only thing that changed was going from a 200-watt to 500-watt amp. That is not the case, because the M&K and the Rhythmic were using different drivers and different cabinets and all the rest. But let's say that the only thing that changed was 200 watts to 500 watts. The only time you would ever notice that difference, strictly from the amplifier, is the last 3 decibels at the very loudest extreme of that amplifier. Right. That is the only place you would notice it. All the rest of the time, the amplifier is using well less than 200 watts, and you are not going to hear any difference whatsoever. It is only the very last little bit of the extreme loudness end where you would have about 3.5 decibels more headroom from the 500-watt amp than the 200-watt amp. But given that the other components were different too, there's more to it than that. But purely on the amplifier, that's what will be happening.
And especially with subwoofers where placement and room acoustics and everything else is so very important, saying that you changed one thing about, like, even if you really did, like Rob said, just change one thing about that subwoofer, so many more things have a different, have a greater effect on how that subwoofer sounds to you than anything else. Like, how many times have we seen people go, I had a small subwoofer, and then I bought a massive subwoofer, and they sound exactly the same. Well, you're sitting in the frickin' null, my dude. You know what I mean? You're sitting in a huge suck out that, no matter how much louder you play it, it's just not going to sound any better because you're still in the null. So we don't know.
The other way you can look at this is, I want a glass of water. All I want is glass. That's all I want is a glass of water. I have a 1-liter water bottle, and I could pour the water out of that, or I have a 55-gallon drum. Now, as far as filling up my glass of water, does it matter?
No.
Does it matter which one I pour the glass of water out of?
Is the size of the water source.
The vessel, it's either 1 liter or a 55-gallon drum. You could have a 5-watt amplifier versus a 25,000-watt amplifier. But if all you need is half a watt to get to the volume level that you want to, doesn't matter which one it came from, you still only use half a watt. Yeah.
So now you're seeing subwoofers with 1,500 and 3,000-watt amps. I mean, you're looking at Power Sound Audio and stuff like that. But so how exactly?
JL Audio, all those,
yeah. So how exactly do these manufacturers go about deciding what sort of amplifier wattage is needed? Do these multi-kilowatt amplifiers cost significantly more? I can already tell you that yes is the answer to that. Are they truly necessary? And the answer is yes, most of the time. I mean, I don't think anybody's throwing a massive amp inside of a subwoofer just so they can have bigger spec numbers. I mean, they can be, but I think for the most part they don't, because there's no real point to it. Why do you need a big... Yeah,
matching up what the driver can do with how much power it requires to get the driver to do that thing.
Look at the cabinet, too. A lot of times, a ported sub has a much smaller amplifier than the sealed version. That's because the forces involved are completely different. The air goes in and out of the port as the driver goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, right? Whereas the sealed driver, the sealed subwoofer, when the driver moves, it's either creating less air pressure behind it as it moves out, and it's having to fight with the air trying to basically suck it back in, or it's when the driver is pulling into the enclosure, it's creating greater pressure where the air is trying to push it back out again.
That's right.
So to overcome those forces, you need a larger amplifier in order to do so. So there's and like the size of the driver, the material of the driver, the size of the magnet, the size. So many things go into why, and we haven't even gotten to trying to hit specific volume levels, which also plays a part here. So there's a lot of things that go into that.
There is the just the mathematical side of it, the arithmetic side of it, which is when you double the wattage of an amplifier, you only increase the output by 3 decibels. That's everything else stays equal when we double the amount of amplifier power. So from 500 watts to 1,000 watts, that's only 3 decibels more if everything else stayed equal. And then from 1,000 watts to 2,000 watts, which is in the range of the things you're talking about, that's only another 3 decibels. So that's 6 decibels more versus the 500 watt amp. It's not what looks like it's going to be 4 times louder. It's not 4 times louder. It's not even twice louder, because 6 decibels isn't technically even twice louder. 10 decibels would be, because it's a logarithmic scale. So that's part of it too, is the arithmetic of realizing that even though those numbers look a whole lot bigger, it's on a logarithmic scale, it's not on a linear scale. We aren't just dividing one by the other, and that's how many times more powerful it is. So that's a big part of it too.
All right, let's do Mike here. We're coming up on 2 hours, and yes, we have a lot of questions left. I just scrolled through them, and we've got a ton of questions left. So next week, we're going to go fast. Remind me.
I wanted to this week, but apparently we didn't.
I blame you. You should have said something.
Right.
Let's blame Vincent. I think it says fault.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Mike describes himself as an old geezer who's been to AV hobby for many years. Mike, get in line, buddy. It starts behind me. He recalls that when he first started hearing about acoustic room treatments in your listening room, the recommendation was to create a live end, dead end setup. Yep, I remember that too.
Oh, yes.
But listening to us and other home theater enthusiasts these days doesn't seem to be the goal anymore. So what has changed over the years when it comes to acoustically treating a listening room, and why? Science, my man. Research. Okay? So a lot of acoustic suggestions, including subwoofer placement suggestions, were based on, this seems to make sense. Or, I did this once and it sounded pretty good. And then somebody going online and saying that this was the holy grail of how to do it. Okay, that's why we place subwoofers right next to our front speakers, because we thought, well, the sound's coming from the speakers, the bass should come from that same location. Or used
the subwoofer as the stand for a speaker, and ideally would have 1 sub per speaker. That was definitely still a lot of people want to do that. They either want their speakers to be truly full range, or they want a subwoofer underneath, physically directly underneath every single
still
speaker.
People out there, and I rail against it constantly, who are like, you need to add diffusion to a room if you put too much absorption. I'm like, you haven't gotten to too much absorption. You haven't gotten there. So you do not need diffusion. So there's still a lot of, I would not necessarily say misinformation, but ill-informed.
Well, and I mean, as far as saying like there's been more science and research, there has. We have ignored a lot of it, and I actually say we, including Tom and I, because we don't actually even go by Floyd Toole's recommendations for how to acoustically treat a room.
That is true.
We don't follow his recommendation, which is to not do much treatment at the first reflection points on the side walls. He doesn't actually recommend that, Floyd Toole we're talking about, and he recommends actually putting considerably more treatment on the front wall, which is a wall that a lot of advice these days says to just ignore, because you don't have high frequencies traveling back, so not worried about specific reflections off the front wall. But in Floyd Toole's research, he was more looking at what gets you the most linear output generated from the speaker itself, and then the most uniform dispersion of that sound coming out of the speaker, then reflecting off of the surfaces and reaching the listener. So, I mean, his approach that he's written about is not even the advice that we give as Tom and Rob on this podcast, although there are other experts in the field who give advice very similar to what we suggest. And then there are yet more, I mean, true experts, real experts in here who get very good results, who deploy, different acoustic treatment patterns than what we recommend. And again, ultimately, a lot of this comes back to we're not nearly as good at hearing differences in things as we like to believe that we are. So when we talk about treating rooms slightly differently from each other or having slightly different approaches to how to acoustically treat a room, actually being able to reliably tell differences when we're listening to real content it's a very dubious thing. You can get away with a whole lot less and a whole much greater difference in treating a room than what a lot of people would like to believe, that there has to be like one solution and it's the only optimal solution that could possibly work. But I mean, just to explain what that live and dead end was for anyone who didn't, live through that time and isn't familiar with it, it was heavily treating the front of your room.
Heavily treating the front of the room.
With absorption. I mean, essentially just taking like 6 to 8 inch thick absorption and just covering the entire front wall, the entire front portion of the side walls, the entire ceiling of the front of the room, and then leaving the back of the room completely untreated. Yeah. And that was the live end at the back and the dead end at the front. And the idea was you had essentially no reflections at all coming from the front portion of the room, and then all the reflections happening in the rear of the room. And the idea was to try and create this sort of like very precise imaging from the front, but with a whole lot of diffuse sound and reflected sound behind you to give you that sense of being in a honestly too reflective auditorium, because that was sort of the sound that was trying to be recreated there. So we've come around to the notion that, okay, honestly, it depends on how the recording was mastered, because you have recordings that were taken, they took a microphone to a live location and recorded the sound there, in which case the recording contains the reflection information, right? If you're trying to virtually transport yourself to where that recording took place, right? Live recording at a concert venue, then you sort of want to have pretty even decay times throughout the entire room so that you aren't adding new reflection information that's already being played at you from the speakers. But then we also have recordings where they just hooked a microphone directly to the instrument, or it's like literally just the electrical feed coming in from a electrically generated virtual sound. And those don't have any reflection information built into them. So if we have our whole room really heavily padded, well, now it sounds unnatural to us because we know we're in a physical space, but there's no sound cues reaching our ears to tell us that in this super heavily padded room that we're in a space. There's a discontinuity there, and it makes us feel uncomfortable. So we end up with this new rule of thumb, right? Somewhere in the range of about 20 to 30, 15 to 30% of the total surface area of the room with something on it, right? Not just flat, bare, reflective walls, about 30% of the room with something there to break up the sound. We're going to say, hey, just go absorption only. Go for about 20% of the room absorption only, because if you add diffusion to that, you are only decreasing the high frequency even more. And there seems to be this thought that when you put diffusion in the room, you bring the room back to life. That would only happen if you covered some of the absorption that you've already got there with something reflective. Then you slightly lessen how much high frequency information was reduced. But I mean, honestly, adding the diffusion in there doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us when we look at the figures in terms of how much was the high frequency reduced. Adding diffusion to a part of the wall that wasn't already treated only reduces the high frequency information even more. So it's a very specific scenario we're going to add diffusion. So we're just more approaching it from the idea of, we want the front soundstage, the most critical soundstage that we hear the best, we want nice linear controlled sound coming from there. So yeah, we want to treat the front wall when the speakers are either too far away or not far away enough or not close enough to the front wall that we do have resonance happening in that lower mid-range and upper bass region. We want to control that with some bass trapping on the front wall. We want to control the bass trapping so the speaker to subwoofer transition is nice and smooth throughout the entire room. And then we want to address the specific reflections so that we aren't getting weird sound cues that are discontinuity. There's a discontinuity there in the sound cues. So that leads us to treating, the side walls, the rear wall, the front wall, and the corners. And that's where we are today. So it's not a full live end, dead end like it used to be. And it's all about just sort of creating the more uniform linear response. That's basically the goal. And so far, this is the best way we've come up to do it.
I just want to point out that it's my fault that we're going long.
Mine was a real answer, at least. I wasn't going off on a tangent.
I go off on tangents. What are you talking about, liar?
Oh, yes.
You and Vincent are in league against me.
That's right.
Yeah, I kind of zoned out with what Rob was saying there, but I'm pretty sure it was very, very, very important. The reality is that like live end dead end. Sorry, if you were to set something like that up now, and you might go, I think it sounds pretty good. I think it sounds pretty good. What are you talking about? I don't understand why you guys. It sounds
better than completely untreated, fully reflective.
Everything, anything's better than nothing. I don't know how in acoustic treatments, like anything you do is better than nothing. So yes, when we got people to do live end dead end, which was very, very rare, but when we got people to do it, they're like, wow, this sounds way better than nothing. Well, of course it does. But could it sound even better? And I think the answer is yes. With the slap echo issue that you get from that live end part of it, which I don't think it was ever properly addressed in the live end dead end debate. Because we didn't really know about it. Nobody was talking about slap echoes.
Well, and also, when that was popular, it really was like 2-channel only. And actually, it got its start when it was mono. That's where that came from. And that's sort of where the live end, they're like, that's why you don't want to take away any reflections from behind you. Because when it's mono, the only way to get any sense of spaciousness was to still have reflections.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where that generated now.
And I think there's got to be at least part of this discussion has to be on how things are recorded. Yeah. When we record, when you're listening to a studio recording, are they adding in reverb? Are they adding in the effects to make it sound like it's a more live? In which case, you don't need your room to do that for you. Or are they recording things completely dead so that whatever the venue you're in will then add character to it, which I think is much less common. So, I don't know. All right, let's do Matt real quick.
Okay.
If Rob can control himself. And we'll see. Matt and his family are moving into a new house, so that means an excellent excuse for some home theater upgrades. He'll have lots of questions over the coming months. Well, get in line, buddy, because the line's long right now. But for the moment, in his current home theater, he uses a BenQ HT 3550 projector with a 110-inch screen. His current room is mostly dark, but not 100% light controlled. He enjoyed the BenQ, but for HDR content, it doesn't really deliver a significantly different look versus SDR content. So if he uses the wide color mode for DCI P3, everything ends up looking dimmer and a little too dark, to be honest. So he's hoping for an upgrade in the new house that the setup will be just right with a 120-inch screen this time. So, should he consider going with the ultra short throw setup? He's seen some of the laser UST models claiming 100% of Rec 2020 color. Is that something worth aiming for? Or would, say, a traditional long throw projector like the Epson LS 11000 deliver the better overall image in a dedicated theater room with full light control this time? Is it worth aiming for something that can do 4K 120? He doesn't say anything about being a gamer, so I don't really know how much 4K
the 4K 120 is pretty easy to answer. That's really only important if you're a gamer and you got an Xbox Series X or a PS5 or a high-end gaming PC, and you're going to be sending it 4K 120. That's really the only time. So I think that just answers that full stop as far as 4K 120. Are you a high-end gamer?
As far as the ultra short throw debate, I believe that I still, for right now, until I see more ultra short throw projectors, and this, I hate saying that because I get all tongue tied. Until I see more projectors that I think do really good black levels.
That's the issue.
I feel like they're a compromise that is a good one. Like if you're like, I want a big screen, but I don't want a flat panel, and I want something huge, and I can't put something at the back of the room. What do? UST is the way to go. I like it. I think it's good.
It's a whole big set of compromises, but ones that can absolutely make sense in the right situation.
Right. But in your situation where you're like, I don't know, I could go either way. I think if you're really worried about performance, you should go with the traditional projector setup.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, if you're gonna have a dedicated room this time, full light control this time, and you're like, I really want to be blown away and dazzled by this image, you want a traditional projector. The Epsons would be a great choice. There is a difference, unfortunately. I wish there weren't a difference, given that there is a price difference. But there is a difference between the LS11000 and the LS12000, because the LS12000 has the ultra black panel. And it is visibly different. If you have a fully light-controlled room, it is visibly different from the LS11000. So it's not quite the same as back when we had the 5050 UB versus the Pro 6050 UB. And performance-wise, they were essentially identical. But the Pro version cost $1,000 more because it came with a ceiling mount and an extra lamp and the black case and a longer warranty. And you ended up paying $1,000 more for that. This time, the $1,000 more for the LS12000 actually gets you better black levels in the Pro version. So I wish that weren't the case, because I'd love to be able to keep the price capped at the 11,000, but the 12,000 does give you a difference. But that said, if you don't need 4K 120, definitely consider like an Epson 5050 UB. Because there's no reason not to consider that. Much less expensive. Doesn't do 4K 120, tops at 4K 60, but it's still excellent as far as black levels and contrast and brightness for that HDR goes. Do you need to worry about 100% of Rec 2020 color? Absolutely not. We have no content that uses that. Our content is coming in Rec 2020 containers, but it stops at DCI-P3 color. So we aren't using the full Rec 2020 capabilities, so we don't need to worry about projectors that can actually do that. That's a mark on the spec sheet type of thing, just so they can put it in there. But no, if you want the best performance, regular projector. If you're not going to get all the way up to the price points of the JVCs, which are darned expensive these days, $7,000 plus, the Epsons are absolutely the way to go.
So which acoustically transparent screen should he consider? And we always talk about Seymour AV, so I'll go ahead and say it, because that's kind of like the benchmark for the best. And you can DIY it, which takes down the cost significally.
Yeah,
but
if you're not just the material.
Yeah, if you order just the material. But if you're not that kind of person, they are on the pricier side. But depending on how far away you're going to sit, you can go with a cheaper option.
Yeah, so the less expensive option that we would point you to would be Elite screens. Now, you want to make sure if you're going there, the only one I like is the Acoustic Pro UHD. You're not looking at any of the ones that do ambient light rejecting plus acoustically transparent. You don't need that for the dedicated room with the light control. You're getting a standard white screen, but the Acoustic Pro UHD is pretty darn good, and Elite Screens has some very nice affordable frames, and if you want one that is retractable and still quite affordable and has acoustically transparent screen, then Elite Screens with the Acoustic Pro UHD is also a good choice there. But if you want the tops in performance, then we still like Seymour AV the best. And yeah, like Tom mentioned, if you're willing to build your own frame, you can get just the raw screen material.
Lastly, are there any projector models on the horizon that you have to wait and keep an eye out for? We have no insight onto this whatsoever.
No. Yeah. But what I would say is traditionally the higher end projectors like you're now considering are almost always on a 3-year life cycle.
And they just came out, right?
We're not there yet. Yeah. The Epsons came out, about a year ago now.
And we don't know how long it's going to take him because this is a new house, right?
That's true.
Yeah. So
but
my thing is buy last.
Right. Yeah, buy the projector last. But I wouldn't expect there to be something in the immediate future, because Sony's just came out not very long ago, their newest ones. The JVCs, they've been out for a year and a half now, but I still wouldn't expect brand new ones to be replacing what they've got right now. Same for Epson. So there's nothing on the immediate horizon that I would be looking out for in those price classes.
All right, let's call it there. That's what we've got. So
that's all right. Yeah, we'll hurry on next time and not spend much time on the intro next time. So Nick is on the list. John is on the list. Ilango, Joseph, who I was hoping to... Was it Joseph I was hoping to get to? Anyway, Zach and Adam. There we go. Okay, yeah, got to the end of the list there. A whole bunch. We got through like a little over half, but We'll be okay.
All right. We want to thank our 137 patrons over at patreon.com for being our listeners of the week. Thank you for supporting the podcast.
For sure, that is patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 137 patrons over there.
As well as Micah, David, Martin, Ilango, and Adam for sending us notes of gratitude.
Thank you very much. I'll say the names one more time. Micah, David, Martin, Ilango, and Adam. Thank you for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. We appreciate it. And a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
This is the AVRant podcast, and we do answer your home theater questions when you send them to us at question@avrant.com.
That's the place.
For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.